Ladies and gentlemen, our program will begin in 5 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, our program is about to begin. Please welcome Mirabella Brocate-Elbaz, Global Head of Brand and Marketing at Semaphore.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon session at Semaphore's 2025 World Economy Summit, Securing Our Future. It's so wonderful to have you all with us today, and I hope you all enjoyed a lovely lunch or wonderful meetings today, and thank you for making the time to join us across these 3 days of programming at the World Economy Summit. I'm Mirabella Brocate-Elbaz, Global Head of Brand and Marketing here at Semaphore. For those of you who may be less familiar, Semaphore was built nearly 3 years ago to help leaders find clarity in an increasingly interconnected and complex world, one that is shaped by polarization and really doing so with our fair-minded, independent journalism. We now have amassed nearly 1 million subscriptions worldwide, and the world's leadership is increasingly turning to Semaphore's journalism for our sophisticated and balanced news and insights. And the World Economy Summit is our platform dedicated to advancing the dialogues that we believe are most critical. Those that are really focused on strengthening resilience and catalyzing global growth during these kind of times of massive shifts within our global economy. And we did not quite imagine that the summit's timing would take place during such a consequential time in our global economy. We're obviously gathered here in Washington, D.C. At a moment of extraordinary uncertainty and extraordinary transformation in the global economy and in the world order. It's a moment that demands clarity, leadership, wisdom, and dialogue across sectors, borders, and ideologies. And this afternoon's program is going to delve into the rapid technological breakthroughs that are kind of intersecting with a very fast, increasingly complex geopolitical landscape, ultimately kind of reshaping the ways that governments and businesses operate. And navigating this terrain is going to require not just resilience and agility, but a forward-looking mindset, one that embraces the opportunities that are emerging from advances in AI, from cybersecurity and beyond, to build a more secure future for the world. Throughout this session, we're going to explore these issues through incisive conversations with global thought leaders, with top government leaders, and with global CEOs. And to kick us off, please join me in welcoming German Finance Minister Jörg Kukies in conversation with Semaphore's business and finance editor, Liz Hoffman.
Mr. Minister, thank you for coming. You've come a long way.
Thank you for the invitation.
So who knows what it'll look like by the time we get off stage, but on the trade talks, is Europe in a rush? Is the US's hand here getting stronger or weaker as this drags on?
I wouldn't say that there is a rush, but we do see a sense of urgency to find an agreement because, as we saw, we are announcing a new data set of growth, which won't be great. The IMF is announcing a reduction of the growth numbers. So in that sense, like the urgency to act is definitely there. And I think the one of the things that every CEO that I speak with tells me is it's all about reducing uncertainty at some point, because at the moment, while nobody knows whether there will be a deal, what the deal will entail, investment decisions are being procrastinated, consumers are procrastinating consumption decisions. So at the end, from that perspective, it's bad for everyone.
So there's a Polish official, I think 2 weeks ago, said, the U.S. just lost $5 trillion. Like, we'll just wait and see how this goes. But you're saying that even though it might be that you could get a better deal in a couple of weeks, that the economic picture will have gotten significantly worse?
Well, first of all, we don't know that.
Yeah.
And second of all, the longer we wait for an agreement, the longer we let the uncertainty in both of our economies linger. And I just don't see that as a positive.
Okay. I think were in Washington just before the tariffs were announced.
Yes. Well, I was in Washington. I landed literally when the auto tariffs were just announced, which was a few days before the reciprocals were announced. So I was sandwiched in the middle.
Perfect. Autos are what % of the German industrial economy?
It's a lot.
But did you, in talking to administration officials, did you get a sense that they were going to do what they did? Like, what do you think they were trying to accomplish?
It was very clear that the window to talk about what would be announced on the 2nd of April was closed. So that was very clear that there wasn't a willingness to sort of rethink the ideas around the 2nd of April. But everyone also said that there would be this phase of engagement and willingness to negotiate, and I took with me the clear message to Berlin and Brussels that we should take seriously on the one side what would be announced, but on the other side also the clear signal that exactly what's happening now, namely a phase where there is room for negotiation, would come up.
And how much of the negotiation is going to happen at what's the Brussels versus Berlin? Brussels to Berlin to Paris to, how is that going to
Brussels.
happen? Okay.
The European Union is completely clear.
You have requests and you send them off.
It's one of the very few policy areas that's completely delegated authority. Brussels is speaking on our behalf, and the endorsement procedure afterwards is such that, as in the United States, many international agreements then have to get ratified, and it's the same way in Europe, where the European Union negotiates and then the member states have to agree to it. But the whole negotiation is being done at the European level.
So how do you make sure that German autos are right up there with French champagne, and as these sort of one-off requests get mandated and people figure out what goes in and what comes out, how do you make sure that you're in line?
I think we're not that different between the US and Europe in that sense, because as everyone in the United States knows, there's specificities of what gets produced in California and Minnesota and Kentucky and everywhere else. So, like the fact that there's regional interests that get voiced and that get escalated to the government, I think that's just the most normal thing on earth. And I actually don't think there's a huge discrepancy there between the United States and Europe in this sense, because we have in Europe delegated the authority, and of course it's the Commission's job to get awareness of which industries have which interests and how is everything connected with not only the United States, but also the read across to Canada and Mexico, because of course a lot of our automotive value add and our chemicals and pharmaceuticals, et cetera, also gets created through global value chains that don't only run, like straight line Germany to the United States. Very often things move first to Mexico and then to the United States or in other channels.
The Bundesbank, Central Bank of Germany, owns a lot of treasury bonds. I realize it's not quite your remit, but what do you think of, has the U.S. become a riskier borrower, a less creditworthy player over the last couple of weeks?
I absolutely don't think so. I mean, of course, markets are reassessing things constantly around what bond yields characterize, but I don't have the impression that there's any reassessment of credit risk. I mean, the United States is the global reserve currency and will probably remain so for a very long period of time. Europe has to get its act together in terms of creating a capital markets union to create more depth and more liquidity in our own benchmark bonds. Germany contributes to that. But I think when we saw this adjustment to the announcement, yes, it was quite strong and it was volatile, but it was all orderly and very much, just the pricing in of new information, which is what markets are supposed to do.
I want to talk about Europe, and just like one more on tariffs, which is Angela Merkel, when she was promoting her book last year, I think, said that Donald Trump had told her repeatedly that there were too many German cars in New York, and that if we're up to him, he would tariff them out of the market entirely. So, and I think there's a couple of, I think one of Audi's bestsellers is now essentially unsellable, just from an economic point of view in the US. What's your advice to CEOs of Audi and Volkswagen as they think about trying to maintain access to the market?
I can tell you a personal anecdote. My wife drives an American car.
What does she drive?
A BMW.
Okay.
Made And it's
free trade at work.
And it works because it's a BMW made in Spartanburg, South Carolina, right? And it's true, and it's I'm not making this up. I just spoke with the Minister of Finance from the state of Baden-Württemberg, which is the home of Mercedes, and his new official car is also an American car built in Chattanooga by Mercedes, right? So this global value chain, I mean, BMW is the biggest exporter of cars by value of the United States of America. So in that sense, like this whole intricacy of the value chains show that there really isn't such a thing as a pure American, pure German. There's a few exceptions, of course, but the large OEMs from Germany are all very big players in the United States.
You'd think there'd be a way to get a cheaper BMW made in Germany, or like they wouldn't have to make that round trip.
Well, but I think that's one of the ideas that, and a lot of the automotive makers produce centralized certain types of cars in certain specialized factories, and then they distribute them to the world. So the fact that the large German car makers build some of their cars in Germany, some of them in the United States, some of them in Mexico, some of them in China is a perfectly normal economies of scale kind of thinking in business terms. And of course, tariffs distract from that, and tariffs make this whole system less efficient. And probably at the end of the day, if we overdo it, make us less competitive versus China rather than more competitive.
In terms of making Europe more competitive, when I talk to CEOs, what they say is, well, you can launch a product in one country, but you can't scale it. You come to the US and you can have 300 million consumers, and you run into a boundary, you run into a border, you run into a currency problem. How do you make the investment community think that you are serious about fixing this time?
Well, first of all, by nature, of course, the European market is less uniform than the American market because of the fact that there's many languages spoken and many specificities of the markets are different. We are a less unified political entity than the United States, and also culturally, we're also a bit more diverse. But that is, that's normal. What we have to urgently change, and what is subject to political agreement, is that we can and will need to deepen our common market for goods, which is already quite well integrated. For services, it's horribly integrated. So the integration in the financial sector, capital markets union, is not very good in terms of insolvency law. We have 27 insolvency laws, which makes scaling financial products much more difficult, consumer products much more difficult, for legal services. For many of these things, there's just no unified European market. And that's something the Draghi report, the Letter report, the Commission's strategy, the competitiveness compass, all say the same thing. We just now have to get into doing instead of always talking about it.
Would this have happened without Donald Trump?
Well, the whole discussion around European competitiveness predates the election in the United States.
But the Draghi report, it came out, everyone said, that's nice, and it didn't feel like it had a lot of momentum around it.
I wouldn't agree with that. I mean, there were already a lot of discussions around, and it was mandated 2 years ago. So this whole discussion around the fact that around 2.5 decades ago, the European Union and the United States were at the same GDP level. Now the United States is about 45-50% higher, depending on how you currency adjust, than Europe. I mean, that phenomenon and that problem has been discussed in Europe for quite a long time. Of course, now this whole impulse on we now have to really urgently fix our problems, it has become stronger, but it's not only a Trump phenomenon. I mean, Germany has been overly dependent on Russia for energy, on the United States for security, and on China for exports and imports. And so our fundamental structural problems are not only associated with the United States, they're also associated with the fact that we've over-relied on building stuff in Germany and exporting it to China. We've been over-reliant on importing energy from Russia and not diversifying enough. So we have more issues in our structural problems of our economy than only the issues that Trump addresses.
So Germany is borrowing a lot of money It's going to do a major infrastructure investment, defense spending investment. It's a country that has been pretty frugal for a long time, does not carry a lot of government debt, doesn't do a lot of stimulative things. And in fact, we had your predecessor, Christian Lindner, was here last year, and I asked him about this, and he made fun of the Inflation Reduction Act, that it doesn't work, why would we do it? It doesn't work here, Germany doesn't need it. Germany's about to have a really big stimulative industrial policy. So what's the plan? How comfortable are you that you can actually invest in the right things?
So first of all, I wouldn't completely agree with your frugality assessment. I mean, Germany has always been disciplined on fiscal in the good times, but if you remember, when Corona happened, we announced a massive spending plan to stabilize our economy. We were even criticized for doing too much and unleveling the playing field within Europe because we put too much of a fiscal impulse to protect our businesses. When the Russian invasion of Ukraine happened, we made a massive fiscal impulse to assure our energy security and to revamp our energy pipelines and infrastructure within 6 months. So in that sense, and that required a huge amount of fiscal spending. So I would say we've always been sort of the classic, in the good times, reduce deficits, build buffers, but in bad times, and we've had those examples, we have been willing and able to spend a lot of money to fix problems. And that's where we are at right now.
This is a bad time.
This is a bad time because we are seeing that one of the three dependencies that we created is now coming to a big culmination point. Namely, the United States is now very serious in saying we will demand Europe to do its own thing on defense. The first wave, by the way, already came as a result of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So Germany, after Russia invaded Ukraine, in fact only 3 days afterwards, announced a constitutional change that would allow us to go to 2% NATO target, which we had neglected to do, to be fair, for 8 years since the NATO agreement in 2014 to 22. We fell short on that, but we fixed it within the last 3 years, and we are now at 2%. So we are fully in compliance with all of the international agreements that we have. But of course, we see now that the world is changing and that Europe will have to do a lot more than just meeting the NATO target of 2%. Namely, we will have to be able to build the European pillar of NATO to be so strong that it can make a much bigger contribution. So that will require a massive fiscal effort. Some estimates of our constitutional change mean that we will be raising about €1 trillion of debt in the next 10, 12 years roundabout. So that is about 20%, 25%, depending on which reference year you use, of our GDP. So it's a very substantial amount.
Is Germany culturally comfortable remilitarizing? Do you have that muscle?
Yes. I mean, Germany, remember, up until the turn of the centuries, was already at 3.5% of GDP spent for defense. So this is not a new phenomenon to us that there is a threat from Russia. It used to be the threat from the Soviet Union. The Berlin Wall separated our country, and there was a strong willingness to defend against that threat. And so, in that sense, there's never a sense that we can relax. There was this period where the hope that we could extract a peace dividend was probably overweighted, but that's something that is now being fixed.
And remind me how big the non-defense portion of the stimulus, the spending that you're doing is?
Yes, so that's very simple. It's a 500 billion notional special fund that will be reserved and exempted from our debt fiscal rules that will be spent over the coming 12 to 15 years. So 12-year projects have to be filed and approved, and then they will be built in the remainder. So somewhere between 12 and 15 years, that money will be spent in roads, in bridges, in railroads, in ports, in 5G networks, in 6G networks, in digitalization, in health infrastructure. So it'll be a pretty broad definition of infrastructure.
Okay.
And the one thing that I have to add to that is we will not stop at the fiscal side. The one thing that we also have to fix is our lack of structural growth. So apart from the fiscal reform, we also need fundamental economic reform in the labor markets, in the energy markets, in reducing red tape, increasing planning and speed to market, in digitizing our offerings. So in a lot of those non-fiscal areas, we also need a very substantial growth impulse to increase our potential growth.
Is the economy over-indexed to heavy industry, pharmaceuticals? We have a lot of automakers, a lot of big capital-intensive things. Where's the tech come from? Do you even need that?
Well, I mean, I would say SAP is now Europe's largest company by market cap. Siemens is a massive tech company in Germany. If you look at our famous Mittelstand, there's a huge amount of tech companies in there. So in that sense, I would not agree with the fact that we are sort of what you insinuate a little bit, that we're more old economy than new economy. So there is a very good mix. But of course, the fact that we've been underinvested in the digital, the fact that we are traditionally a very debt finance-based economy rather than an equity-based economy has something to do with our pension system not being very reliant on equity returns and 401k type of saving for your own retirement, but rather a pay-as-you-go retirement system where there's no capital accumulation. We are changing that. Just to give you an example, every 6-year-old child will receive a 10 euros per month incentive to build up their old age retirement plan. So that will be paid to them between the age of 6 and 18, because we just think from a fundamental mentality shift, we have to think about a new generation that will grow up just getting used to investing in equity markets and seeing and associating that with a positive building up of a capital stock.
So are these the venture capitalists of 2030 and 2040?
Who knows?
Because if you look at the list of startups, the big startups in the world, I mean, the numbers in Europe versus the numbers in the US are stunning.
Yep.
Stunning. How do you get some more unicorns coming out of the continent?
Well, I think the fundamental difference between Germany and the United States is, I mean, I saw that when I went to university in Boston and Chicago, is people are already thinking of their retirement plans in forms of ETFs and 401ks and all of the things that are equity-based. In Germany, that is simply not the case. So the accumulation, and if you look at where the Sequoias and the Andreessen Horowitz get their money from, it's a lot of pension funds that invest there and then they deploy the money into startups. And this transmission chain just simply doesn't exist to the degree in Germany as it does in the United States. But it's not even a United States versus Germany thing. I mean, Sweden has a much more deep pensions market based on equities. Denmark has one. The Netherlands has one. Australia managed within a decade to build one. And that's the thing that Germany needs to do.
Though I think, too, if you look at the big tech startup success stories that have come out of those places, Spotify, Adyen, I think they're basically all listed in America. They're all listed in New York.
Yes.
But there's a point at which the capital markets in Europe can't sustain. It's hard to start startups, hard to scale them, and then when they get big, they go somewhere else. How do you change that?
I asked the founders of a company called BioNTech, which became famous because it invented the vaccine against corona, which was founded by two professors in my hometown called Mainz near Frankfurt. When I asked them, why did you IPO in New York and not in Germany, they basically said the fund volume of biotech investors in Boston exceeds the fund volume of all investors in Germany. And as long as that's the case, you can't expect as dedicated and as sophisticated analysts and investor base in Germany but that is also congruent with the lack of depth and breadth of equity markets in Germany. So that is certainly something that takes a long time, and Germany alone won't fix the problem. You need, of course, the European scale to address that and to become competitive there.
So you need to get all the pensions in a room and say, take a little more risk? Is that the solution here?
Well, it's not only a question, nudging is certainly an important element of that, but we also have to set the institutional prerogatives to allow that to happen. So we need to increase the incentives for 401k type of pension plans in Germany. And that's part of the coalition agreement of the new government, that both in the corporate pensions pillar and the private pensions pillar, there will be strong tax incentives and incentives to build up those equity-based retirement plans. But I'm not under any naive illusion that this will not be something that you make a reform and it'll be fixed. I mean, this accumulation of funds takes quite a long time, but we have to start setting the impulse and make it known to the world that this is something that is now happening.
Well, we will have you back next year. We'll check in, see how it's going. Thank you so much for joining us.
Very good. Many thanks.
Please welcome Dr. Sebastian Gorka, Deputy Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Counterterrorism at the White House National Security Council, and Shelby Talcott, White House Correspondent at Semaphore.
Okay, joining me now is Dr. Sebastian Gorka. Dr. Gorka has been a longtime advisor to President Trump, and most recently he now is the Senior Director for Counterterrorism. So thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
I know you're busy. So we're here talking about the global economy, and you're pretty involved in one of the places where national security touches the economy. I want to ask, a year from now, how will you know if your strategy against the Houthis worked? Will Red Sea shipping lanes be open?
Yeah. Well, thank you for the invitation. Thank you to Semaphore. I'm not sure the hosts read my bio before I came, because I am a national security wonk through and through. I tend to believe with the Scottish philosopher who called economics the dismal science. So don't ask me questions about economics, but I'll talk to you about national security and where it touches upon it. It's very clear. The president has defined for us what victory looks like with regards to the Houthis, and it means freedom of maritime transit through that strait, all the way through the Red Sea and to the Suez Canal. When we briefed the president that we have US ships being attacked 147 times in the last year through that strait, the fact that a US flagged vessel has not been allowed to travel unmolested off the shore of Yemen for more than 18 months, he said that is unconscionable, that will not be allowed to stand. It's not just a function of America first and the US economy, it is the global economy. Freedom of movement for naval vessels is non-negotiable. So that's really the definition of victory for us when it comes to that campaign and that nation.
Are you confident that that is something you guys are going to be able to achieve?
Oh, utterly, completely. I mean, there was a French writer, François Eisbourg, who coined the term maybe 10 years ago. He said, America is not a superpower, America is a hyperpower. There is nobody that can touch us in the classic metrics of strength. You look at 12 nuclear aircraft carriers, more special forces than most nations have actual soldiers writ large. So yes, the idea that the Houthis can stand up to a sustained campaign from the president and from then our regional allies, that's risible.
And you're also reportedly working on a national strategy
Yes.
to counter domestic terrorism. Can you give us some more details on that? Is there a timeline on when you expect that to be finished, perhaps by the fall?
Well before the fall. As Senior Director for Counterterrorism in the National Security Council, that falls under my remit. So right now I'm in the final stages of drafting the US national security policy for terrorism writ large, not just domestic terrorism, and that will be forwarded to the president, first to the interagency. But yeah, I hope to have the first draft in front of my colleagues within a month.
And this is notable because the first Trump administration didn't do specifically domestic terrorism. It was, I believe that the Biden administration was the first ever to initiate a US strategy to counter domestic terrorism. How is yours going to differ from the Biden administration's? Is there going to be more of a focus on left-wing extremism and terrorism? Is there are you going to address Tesla attacks, for example?
Yeah, utterly, completely. Whether you're trying to kill human beings or whether you're using a Molotov cocktail against a car dealership because you disagree with the founder politically, all of those are acts of terrorism. People lie about terrorism. You've heard the hoary aphorism, the cliche, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. That is garbage. That is Bravo Sierra. It is crap. Whenever you use force for political purposes against the innocent, against a legitimate regime, you are using terrorism. So the difference between the strategies couldn't be starker. We will be focusing on real threats, not made-up threats. We will not be using the counterterrorism enterprise against those who politically disagree with us simply because they're supporters of President Trump. We're not going to allow the counterterrorism tools that we've inherited to be used against 72-year-old grandmothers who are protesting outside Planned Parenthood abortion clinics. That ended as soon as Pam Bondi, my friend Kash Patel, took over at DOJ, at the FBI. So the political distortion of counterterrorism for the purposes of one party is over, has ended. When it comes to the US national security, or the US counterterrorism strategy, it's going to be threat-based. We're going to go back to basics. The majority of the threats we face are jihadi terrorists. Whether they be Sunni or Shia, we are going to focus on the global jihadi threat, which sadly, under the last administration, has increased significantly with the shameful Biden surrender of Afghanistan. And also, when it comes to the cartels that Stephen Miller, the Homeland Security Advisor, and his team are focusing on, the fact that for 4 years, I mean, this just rank insanity, that for 4 years, we were borderless. And I don't care what your politics are, but think like a bad guy for just 10 seconds. If you're MS-13, if you're the cartels, if you're Iran, if you're North Korea, if you're Beijing, if you're Al-Qaeda, if you're Al-Nusra, if you're ISIS, and you literally know that under the Biden-Harris regime there are no border controls, what are you going to do? You're going to insert your operatives into those millions of people who cross the border. How? And if you don't believe anything I'm saying, that's fine. Look it up for yourselves. Under the Biden administration, with your taxpayer dollars, a very expensive app was developed called CBP One, Customs and Border Protection One. You downloaded the app, sitting in Mexico, and whether you're a Mexican who wants to come here for economic reasons, or whether you're a member of Al-Qaeda, you would pre-clear yourself as an asylum seeker, with no evidentiary basis, nothing empirical. I am John Smith, I was born yesterday, and I'm an asylum seeker. You'd cross the border, you'd wave your asylum seeker registration number at the CBP officer and say, hey, I'm an asylum seeker. You would be given a date 8 years from now for an immigration judge to hear your case, and you were waved into the country. I mean, it's like a Monty Python skit. It's like, SNL when SNL was funny. But it's actually a completely horrific national security threat, because if you're the IRGC, if you're ISIS, what are you going to do? Download the app and flood the zone. So, God bless the fact that we've got Stephen Miller, Tom Homan, Governor Noem, because we have a lot of work to do, and it is being done. So whether it's domestic, whether it's external, and I'll just end with one more thing, and this is the tip I give all of my colleagues when I'm chairing meetings in the interagency. I have one metric for the president. It's a very easy metric. There's a reason I have a massive poster of the Twin Towers behind my computer where I sit in my skiff. The only question that matters to me as Senior Director for Counterterrorism is to make sure that that never happens again. And so when I look at the world, whichever part of the world it is, whether it's Syria, whether it's Iraq, whether it's Mexico, I only care about one thing and one thing alone. It's very clear, and the President has made this very clear to me. Is that piece of dirt being used to plan, finance, recruit for, and execute external operations against America or her citizens anywhere? I mean, this is where, there could not be a simpler task in the US government to make sure that 3,000 people aren't killed in 102 minutes on a sunny Tuesday morning in Manhattan, in Pennsylvania, or in this city in Washington, D.C. So, the shorthand in my field is ex-ops. Is that piece of land being used to generate external operations against the United States or her citizens? It's a very simple mission, and we take it deadly seriously.
And I want to stay on this vein. You recently sparked a debate over whether critics of the administration policy should be charged with material support for terrorism. You've said you were speaking literally about financial support, but do you plan to expand the definition of material support to include praise for designated terrorist groups or other forms of speech, something beyond financial support?
It may shock you, but those articles from gutter press rags like the Politico had nothing to do with statements of support, okay? What I said was, if you are actually supporting a threat group, a designated FTO, foreign terrorist organization, you have committed a felony. So let me give you an example from this city. 6-7 years ago, a Metropolitan Transit Police officer, so a police officer from the Transit Police in DC, decided he's going to send $500 to ISIS. He was ideologically aligned with ISIS. The person he was giving the $500 to was actually an FBI asset. That police officer is today sitting in a supermax prison because he materially supported an FTO. That is a felony. So if you are supporting one of the 6 cartels or the 2 gangs we have designated, if you are providing succor or aid to Al-Qaeda, to Al-Nusra, to ISIS, you are committing a felony, and we're going to take that deadly seriously.
So so it will remain just financial support, material support.
Yeah, the technical phrase in the code is material support.
And I also want to touch on Ukraine. We have a few minutes left.
Yeah.
In February 2024, you wrote a piece for the Daily Caller titled "The Case for Ukraine." You compared Ukrainians, quote, fighting for their freedom to colonists in what would become the United States. I'm curious what has changed since then in terms of how you view Russia's war in Ukraine.
For me personally, nothing. I mean, for those who aren't familiar with my background, my parents escaped communist Hungary in 1956. My father was rotting in a political prison with a death sentence, arrested at the age of 20. So for me, Russian occupational forces, I have a bit of baggage with that, and I'm sure you can understand that. And with regards to the Ukraine war, yeah, Ukraine was invaded. And as such, it is right for us to support that nation to reestablish its independence. People need to know their own history. If France, if Denmark, if Spain had not assisted George Washington back in 1776, everyone in this country would still be speaking real English like me, okay? Nations supported us. There were whole ships full of French muskets that were smuggled to the revolutionary forces by the French in our fight for freedom against an oppressive government that did not represent us. That is the analog to Ukraine. Where am I today? The only thing that has changed for me is I'm a little bit disturbed by what I witnessed in the Oval. President Trump is absolutely right. The bloodshed has to end. My immediate boss, the National Security Advisor, the first ever Green Beret to serve in that position, is right. God bless Mike Waltz when he called it a meat grinder. The meat grinder has to stop, and I'd like to see both sides come to the table as President Trump has given them an opportunity to do so. So the only thing that changed is I'm a little bit disappointed with Kiev as much as I'm disappointed with Moscow.
So you think the president's current approach to the war in Ukraine is working? Because he's
because he's communicated 2 days ago that there's a certain level of frustration in the Oval Office. And Kiev and Moscow better pay attention. That's all I'm saying.
And just to close it out, we've got time for one more question.
And thank you for your running a very tight ship. I have to get back to the White House, so I appreciate it.
This is something that the Director of National Intelligence alluded to in her past testimony, but I'm hoping you can expand on it. Does the intelligence community have any evidence of foreign funding of pro-Palestinian protests in the U.S.?
Not that I can mention on an open stage and outside of a skiff.
Okay, fair enough. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's been
Thank
fascinating.
you. God bless.
Thank you.
Please welcome Paul Knopp, CEO of KPMG, and Matt Murray, Executive Editor of The Washington Post.
Good afternoon. Oh, geez, these chairs. Paul, it's great to see you. Thanks for taking a few minutes to talk with us today. So, KPMG, by the way, as everybody knows, professional services, advisory services, you know everything about everything that's really going on in corporate America. So we really wanted to talk to you about AI and some of the survey data and things you've been learning lately. So we're in this transformative moment where AI is coming into the world and we're all trying to figure out what it means. Can you give us a snapshot in the workplace right now of where AI is, where it isn't, how people are using it, and what's happening in the workplaces?
Yeah, so I'll do it from two perspectives. One, what we see advising clients, and secondly, our quarterly pulse survey, which just came out, which provides really recent information. So you see in this survey, 93% of CEOs and business leaders that are surveyed saying that generative AI and AI have already improved or enhanced their long-term competitive position in the market, has improved their strategic planning, and has made their strategic performance better. So that's pretty fascinating. That's almost unanimous. You see another piece of data that says that CEOs from 1 quarter ago have said that they're going to increase their AI spending by 30%, with more confidence around what's happening in their organizations. And really importantly, it's being adopted within organizations. So the survey revealed that about 60% of all employees in these organizations use productivity tools on a daily basis, and about 60% use knowledge assistance multiple times during the week, which says that it's really going mainstream in large and medium-sized organizations.
Can you talk a little more, Paul? When you just used a couple examples, but using AI, what are the most concrete ways, the most concrete functions at this point that people are adapting?
So there's no doubt that anything involving the customer experience, it's really a great technology. Touching customers, front office, call centers. Increasingly, it's being used to develop software and automate software, routinely speaking. But the truth of the matter is that agentic AI is getting us to the point now where 60% of companies have it in the pilot phase from this survey. And what we see all the time by helping companies, we helped one large financial services company recently develop a front office, or do a front office transformation using Salesforce, Agentforce technology to really change the way that they face the market. And so the important point is with agentic AI and these agents that companies are developing, it is going to touch every operating model or business process in the organization, because the software, the enterprise software companies, the tech companies are putting the agents into their software. So you're going to have to use it in the future. I mean, of course, you could opt out, but what companies are finding and what employees are finding is it's making their business processes more efficient and effective, hopefully. And if it's not more effective, then you're dealing with some risk. But it's certainly going to be pervasive throughout the entire procure to pay, order to cash, almost every business process there is.
And it's genuinely efficient in a certain way. I remember when we all remember when the internet debuted, and it was the magical tool, but we didn't imagine life with 400 emails a day. We aren't seeing AI have those kind of side effects in that way for companies where new kinds of work are created, even as old are displaced. It's genuinely seen as an efficiency tool for these companies it's in their current processes?
I would say efficiency, but sometimes we lose sight of how much more effective we might be able to be too when it comes to the amazing things these augmented large language models can produce in terms of deep research. So it's both efficiency and its effectiveness of the workforce. It's really causing people to be upskilled in the workforce today.
So we're at a moment, of course, of a lot of uncertainty. There's economic uncertainty about the effects of tariffs, sort of a broader policy uncertainty, which predates the current administration. It's been a feature of government in this town for a while. How are CEOs or companies weighing AI and making AI decisions against that backdrop? Does it have a tendency to make them, embrace AI more rapidly? Are they more cautious? Like, how are those factors interacting?
Yeah, what we're seeing with our clients, as I mentioned in the survey, we're seeing increased investment in generative AI and AI for a couple of reasons. One is everyone's seeing that they can potentially do more faster, more efficiently for lower cost within the organization, the back office, the middle office, the front office. There's no doubt that the technology is made with people developing agents and personas, industrializing them. It is really making companies more efficient. And in this world where we're all trying to be more efficient and create more capacity to invest, that's really important. Then you have the complexity side of things too. So for instance, we have a tax platform called Digital Gateway where our clients use Digital Gateway with embedded AI for many different parts of their tax organization. But one thing we've recently developed to deal with complexity is something we call the Digital Gateway Tariff Modeler. So companies can input with our help and insights the current tariff policies, the modeled tariff.
It updates in real time.
It updates in real time. That's the key. Yes, and so you have something like that, and you have other uses of it. For instance, in modeling supply chains, which is really complicated in today's world.
Yeah. You talk about company efficiency, and sometimes that's a euphemism for job cuts. And a big discussion around automation for some time now has been, is this going to be a job destroyer? And optimists, of course, say it will create some new roles, but realistically, right now, I don't know where we are in that cycle. What's your honest view of what effect this is going to have on employment and jobs?
Well, I'll always give you my honest view. And part of it is I don't know. So let me explain what I mean by that. So there is no doubt that what we're seeing at our clients, what we're seeing in the economy, just imagine today the world economy without AI, generative AI, how much it's produced in terms of economic activity is just amazing. And we think that, and we continue to think that, and I think that over the long term, it's going to promote job growth. Having said that, the nature of the jobs, the activities that people are going to be doing beyond, let's say, a 2 or 3 year time horizon is becoming less clear. Where we're confident is that the U.S. economy, the world economy has been very resilient. We have shown over the course of decades an ability to reimagine what people do and move them to more valuable activities. We think that's going to happen, and that AI is going to create more growth in the economy, in our businesses. But having said that, I also believe that beyond a year from now, there will be situations where entire jobs might be replaced by AI. And it's going to put a real premium on ensuring that we upskill, reskill, train talent, which actually in an economy like ours, where we have a structural imbalance in our workforce, with a lower birth rate, with less people going to college, with the other challenges in demographics, we're going to need some technology to mitigate some of those risks too.
I mean, I realize you're not coming in this with an advocacy point of view, having said it, but since you raised it, when you talk about job reskilling, job retraining, is that a private sector thing? Is that something that you think governments, either state or federally, should be thinking about, given the drama of the AI wave? How do we? That sounds like a certain massive job that we have to get done as this technology.
I think the private sector has already shown some excellence in this area. We've been at this for quite some time, the last several years, with different emerging technologies. and advancement in technology, we've moved people from one aspect of the organization to another. And I've heard certain business leaders say, I don't care what you majored in, we can train you. And I think that is the case, that we feel like we're well equipped to help really well-educated people learn how to do different things. And I think that's why our economy over the course of time has been so resilient, has been so effective at getting people to do more creative and different things in their
It would be
careers.
hard to go back into 1996 when we were learning the internet and imagine influencer as a job. We wouldn't have known what that meant. There was no
Right.
YouTube. That's the kind of thing. that you're talking
Cryptocurrency
about.
entrepreneur or whatever. Yeah. There's so many different ones nowadays. A lot of shiny objects.
So you may have touched on some of this, but to wrap up, between what you see in the survey data and your own interactions with clients and CEOs, which you have every day, what would you say is the most common concern you hear from executives about this moment for AI, and what are the biggest opportunities? What are the things that get the most excited?
Yeah. We did another survey recently which illustrates a concern, and that is that this is a survey of consumers, not of business executives. And it determined that 54% of these consumers in the US are using AI at work secretly. And that's a big concern because it's not subject to the governance and the risk architecture of the organization. So it is data privacy, data security, that's the biggest concern. Quality of the data of the organization ranks right up there with those concerns, and then just generally, will my employees adopt it? But it's really beneficial to ensure that you have your own private, safe, secure environment for this technology to make sure your client's data isn't getting out of your boundaries. And then when it comes to the opportunity, I mean, the opportunities, the growth of this technology is just exponential, and we're not even harvesting a fraction of what's already out there today. We talk about artificial general intelligence, which is coming in the next 1 to 10 years. Nobody can agree on when it's coming. But to me, the opportunity is in the rapid evolution, advancement of the technology. It's getting better every day with multiple different platforms, and it's creating opportunities to, whether it's drug research or something in the healthcare field, or it's just automating your business processes. It's creating tremendous opportunity to do things more efficiently and effectively.
I mean, let me ask you, it's a slightly personal question, but you've been an executive for a long time, you've been in business for a long time. You talked about reskilling. How are you reskilling yourself to understand AI and understand these new technologies? And how do you advise other executives how to learn it, how to think
Right.
it? Do you devote time to it? Are there apps you're using? Are there books you're reading? Because we all have to make that adjustment.
So I have a large personal budget for AI subscriptions. I recently maybe crazy. I'm paying $200 a month for OpenAI's Deep Research Pro, ChatGPT Pro, Gemini, Claude, Perplexity. I use all of them for personal use, and then we have our own KPMG safe, secure environment. So I would never use for personal use something with a client situation. But I think it really pays enormous dividends for everyone to use it outside of work and to test different ones, and to really, I listen to various different podcasts like the AI Daily Brief, Hard Fork. I try to just immerse myself in AI nowadays.
Yeah, it's a challenge for everybody, and it's a moment for a bit of humility, because learning it is pretty important.
Yeah.
Paul Knopp, thank you very much for
Thank you
sitting
so
down
much.
today.
Thanks
Really
for having me.
appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Please welcome Karen Seidman-Becker, Chair and CEO of Clear, and Gina Chua, Executive Editor at Semaphore.
Hi, Karen.
Hi.
How do I know you're you?
My face, my fingerprints, my eyes,
So,
my badge.
So I just wanted to start off making sure we had the table set. So we all think of Clear as the company that gets you through airport security, but in fact it is a we know who you are company. And in fact you're in business with DocuSign and a few other people. So maybe just get a good sense for people of what is the business?
So hopefully we have a lot of Clear members here. But our vision has always been to be a secure identity platform from the very start. So you are you and Clear secures you. That you enroll once and use in so many places to make experiences safer and easier physically and digitally. And you've seen transformation on the digital front, specifically in the last few years. So while we are best known in airports to strengthen security and create frictionless experiences, we are becoming much better known on the enterprise side. So to your point, DocuSign, of course you want to know who signs and sends the agreement. You want to know who they are and where they're from, or on LinkedIn or in Uber. We're doing more in workforce security. You want to keep North Koreans out of your critical infrastructure, which has become an increasing problem in the world that we live in.
So can you talk a little bit more about sort of just the idea of how we are incredibly dependent at this point on sort of understand, we're in a much more distributed world, much more digital world, and in fact the systems that we use to verify people, show up at the office, do you look like your ID, and so on, those are sort of going by the wayside because people are logging in from anywhere.
That is true. So I think the world has absolutely changed. And while we were talking, and it used to be a handshake in person, and maybe they weren't who they said they were, but you kind of thought they were. But in a remote world, in a global world, in a hybrid world, anonymity is the opposite of identity. And so part of the problems in online is who is it? Or in telehealth, are you, the doctor that you say you are, or are you the patient? And so, or in an online dating world, or in a shared economy world, or in a remote hybrid workforce world, identity has become foundational. Look, the world's not getting safer. And people expect frictionless experiences, right? Taxis have gone to Ubers, gone are the days of trying to hail it and wait in the rain. And ordering food online with the paper menu has gone to DoorDash. People expect point and click worlds. I look at my kids, everything now, frictionless. But the threat environment is evolving. So you need technology, you need innovation and automation to have the and, which is strengthening security and delivering frictionless experiences.
So I come from Singapore. We have, a single ID. I'm not saying this is a good thing. I'm just saying this is what it is. We have a single ID. We have a government system that does essentially e-verify of your identity. And in the US, we don't have that, and we're unlikely to have that. We have a patchwork of systems. We have private companies doing this. Does it not make sense to have this as a national system?
So I long studied Estonia, which has what is the most digital economy, 1.6 million citizens. I was in Singapore, and that is a very digital economy. And we don't have that here in the US, right? We have a very, federalized system. You have 50 states, you have 50 driver's license, you have 50 sets of rules. In our government and our agencies, everybody has a different identity system. Identity in the US is very fragmented. And so when we built Clear, we built it with a few things. Estonia in mind, the ability to build a secure identity platform for us, privacy protected and opt-in, that you enroll once and connect to many different things, but also in the world of public-private partnerships, in the world of working together with the government. Specifically, that's how we got started in the Registered Traveler Program, which is a public-private partnership. And so I think this country is what it is in all of its greatness and all of its challenges, but privacy matters. Citizens having access and control of their information matters. And so I just think it's about having an interoperable system in the form of a public-private partnership.
When you say interoperable, you mean having sort of clear standards that I guess any company could fulfill and provide the service?
Yes, absolutely. When you look at PreCheck, which Clear is now an enrollment engine for, so there was a sole source contract with a French company for 10 years, and now 2 new companies, where one of them have entered PreCheck to enroll. It's been great for access, and it's been great for lowering the price, but the government sets the standards, and I think that's great. Look, the Department of Defense, they don't build planes, they set the standards and other people build them. You look up in Canada, and CATSA sets the standards, and then private companies bring it to life. And so I absolutely, we have NIST here, which is our government standard setting body specifically for biometrics. And so I think that absolutely standard setting is wonderful. And then the power of innovation in the private sector here in the US, We have the biggest market cap, greatest tech companies here in the US. And yet at the UN survey of e-governments, we weren't even in the top 18. So I think the need to partner to drive innovation on behalf of citizens, on behalf of security, and on behalf of the experience is such a huge opportunity here, and you just got to lean into it.
So what takes us from 18 to, I don't know, 17?
Not even 18, so how about 18?
All right. So, I mean, what's needed from the government? What's your wish list look like?
What our wish list is to really be able to drive the full capabilities of our system. I think that we haven't been able to move as quickly as we want, so we're vertically integrated. In airports, what would that look like? It would look a lot like Singapore and Dubai and London and Tokyo, which means an e-gate. First of all, we are rolling out. We're connecting your passport to your phone with our new e-chip, e-passport product, which is incredibly exciting. You can digitize passports, which is really important for Real ID, and leave your passport in your safe. So that's a whole different opportunity set. But then you arrive in travel and an e-gate opens with your boarding pass, and then an e-gate on the other side opens with your face. You are in the right place. You have a boarding pass with the right security screening, and in you go. That automated end-to-end experience saves at no cost to taxpayers, which is a little bit like a Tesla in that it's software based in a hardware shell. So you can continue to update the software as the world evolves. And so that is absolutely the vision in travel. And then outside of travel, it's about connecting to things like which we've just announced with Epic, connecting to your electronic health record, which is really important when you think of the ability to change our healthcare system. So there's opportunities, and I think it is about a public and private sector working together in harmony to move further faster. And I think private companies like Clear are willing to spend the money and not ask for the capital.
So I'm just going to ask you to elaborate on one point, because I don't think people understand, I'm not sure I understood till we had this conversation, the whole difference between Clear and pre-check. And you've explained it very well backstage. If you could just sort of, because you go to the airport, there's a line, there's Clear people, there's pre-check people, and there's the rest of everybody else. What does it actually mean,
Sure.
and why are there so many different lanes and
Sure.
systems?
So we love pre-check. We can enroll people in pre-check, but pre-check is about the ability to change physical screening because you've done a background check, an FBI background check, and because of that, you can really drive efficiency on the physical screening side of the airport. Clear is about identity and ensuring that you are who you say you are, and then making sure you have access to what you should have access to. So we are connected to pre-check. We're a universal identity platform. Doesn't matter whether you're pre-check or standard, whether you have a passport or a driver's license. It's a universality, and also creating this next-gen identity because a document is not an identity. So our whole view is a driver's license, Real ID or not, needs to be source corroborated in the world we live in. So really bringing identity with depth. But anyway, there's Clear, which is identity, there's pre-check, which is physical screening, and then connecting them both. But we want, today 30% of Americans are in trusted traveler programs and 70% are not. We want to flip that, right? We want as many people as possible to drive as secure and frictionless experience. Today, there's 3 million people a day, give or take, going through airports. By 2030, there's going to be another 1 million people a day. We have the World Cup coming next year.
Oh, yeah.
We have the Olympics coming. We have more and more travelers coming to the United States. 1 out of every 10 jobs are connected to travel. We have got to drive innovation to make it easier. People I think they love traveling, but they sort of hate the day of travel. We got to change it from dread to joy. We've got to drive automation and innovation and make travel awesome, make airports great.
So this is the obvious question, but it's on everybody's mind. Data breaches, data security. Nobody wants their information sitting, frankly, in too many private companies, and Clear is going to be another company which has a whole chunk of information about me, and what can we do about making people comfortable about that?
So you should know it's top of our mind too, and it has been from day one. And I think you got to start at the start, and it's got to be part of your ethos from day one. We've been partnered with the Department of Homeland Security and been a qualified anti-terrorism technology, and that is crucial. So how have you architected your system? We've architected our system to hold as little data as possible. So as an example of that, we used to hold social security numbers because years ago you needed that as part of the identity stack. We don't. We purged them all. Or housing your data where the CIA data is in GovCloud. Or creating a system that is architected, very distributed, to be more of a mosaic, not a honeypot. And so it is how you're architected. It is about your ethos, but security has been job one from day one, and I think that is crucial.
So let me just flip on, to slightly broader topic, which is there are clearly a zillion places where identity really matters. Your healthcare provider, all of that. We've just seen a voting act go through the House to talk about what are the documents you need, what are the acceptable documents for proving your identity. Why isn't it something much more sophisticated, frankly, like Clear? And I understand not everybody has Clear, but why wouldn't that be an acceptable system? You can actually prove somebody's identity better than a driver's license or a birth certificate.
I think that, look, when I voted in New York and they just asked me to sign a sticker and I was like, you want my driver's license? And they said no. I was like, okay, this doesn't make a ton of sense. And so I do believe that identity matters. I believe that we want to make experiences safer and better, and voting is potentially one of those places if we can get the right guidelines for that. And so I think that these are all potential use cases for Clear. I would also say that almost 32 million people do have Clear today, and that's because not only are we on the travel side, but on the enterprise side, it is free for consumers, and enterprises pay for it. So, it's really important that we continue with Clear and with others to ensure and strengthen our identity system. It's really important for healthcare. It's really important for travel. It's important in the online economy, and I would argue it's important in voting. And you're talking about voter ID. You're really wanting to ensure that someone is who they say they are with depth and certainty. Just want to make sure it's done in a constructive and inclusive way.
So if New York called you up and said, we'll sign you up for a voter, you would do it?
I think if people could do it on their phones, yes, I would.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Please welcome Representative Jim Hines of Connecticut and Morgan Chalfant, Deputy Washington Editor at Semaphore.
Congressman, thank you so much for being here. So I wanted to start first with oversight, because you obviously have the top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee. How hard is it to fulfill your oversight duties under the Trump administration? Does Tulsi Gabbard pick up your calls?
It's a little early to say. There's a lot of letters sitting in the inbox there. We'll see how fast we get responses to them. So honestly, I mean, it's an array of different people, and I don't anticipate that it'll be radically different, but it will be radically more important. For at least two reasons. Number one, three reasons. Oversight's always important in the intelligence community because journalists and lawyers and advocacy groups are not crawling all over the activities of the intelligence community the way they do over so many of our activities. Number two, without coming off as too partisan here, there is no reason to believe that the president will welcome the product that the IC must provide, which is the unvarnished, unbiased truth. So you have a problem that has probably already been exacerbated by the firing of General Hawk at the NSA. And then thirdly, without coming off as too partisan, this is an administration that has been more than willing to take actions which are either in violation of the law or on the margins of the law. And when you're talking about that happening inside the activities of the intelligence community, that's a very serious thing, because it's serious and because it's hidden. So it'll be hard, but it'll be more important than ever.
Mm-hmm. And obviously one issue that has caught your attention and many of your colleagues is the use of Signal by some top administration officials to discuss these war plans. I'm wondering if you think that Pete Hegseth should have to resign over his Signal use.
So I don't think Pete Hegseth is up to the job. I think he's deeply out of his depth. And that sounds like an attack on Pete Hegseth. It's probably the hardest job in Washington. I mean, it's the most complicated, largest, most sprawling bureaucracy, subject to all sorts of authorities and controls. A genius would struggle to do that job well, and Pete Hegseth is not that genius. And so, I'm not surprised by where we ended up. I know why he put up weapons systems and weather is good, 0800, MQ9. It's the kind of thing that, especially if you're a guy, the testosterone flows. It's self-validating. But what worries me in a way, you didn't ask this question, but what worries me more about that maybe predictable thing is Mike Waltz putting it up on the first Signal chat. I know Mike very well. I respect Mike. I trust Mike. Mike was a Green Beret. I mean, very few people in the government are trained with the discipline and the prudence and the care and the abiding by all protocols and procedures than Mike Waltz. But what happens is when Mike Waltz gets into an environment where accountability is an abstraction, maybe optional, where the rules aren't clear, Mike Waltz starts a Signal chat and inadvertently includes a reporter. So I worry more about the context that can even warp a good, well-trained, disciplined person like Mike Waltz. That's a little frightening.
Do you think that he should have to resign his position?
If the administration were sort of telling the Congress how these things happen, I'd be in a better position to say, that was a willful act of negligence or something. So it's a little harder to answer in that case. Again, I respect and trust Mike, and this might have been a one-off, but it's a one-off that never would have happened if Mike were in a context of serious discipline, protocol, and accountability.
I want to ask you about AI. That's obviously something that you're very focused on. There was a headline recently that caught attention for me from Reuters. Huawei readies new AI chip for mass shipment as China seeks NVIDIA alternatives. Wondering if you think the U.S. is falling behind China in the AI race.
We're not. We're not falling behind China in the AI race, but we're also not that far ahead. DeepSeek sort of overturned the table, and everybody was like, this near capable competitor to our best generative models was built a lot more cheaply with a lot less compute, a lot less power consumption. Who knows exactly what went down there? They may have, used pre-trained stuff that made, that was actually attributable to our IP originally. But no, that's one area where I'm confident that we're second to none, but and this is going to be true of all technologies with respect to China, but our lead is not wide. And if we don't act very intentionally about maintaining that lead with all that requires, we will soon be behind.
And the Trump administration sort of continued the Biden administration's practice of using these export controls to prevent chips and other technologies from flowing to China. There was a big Biden rule before he left office that set up a regime essentially for controlling the export of AI chips. I'm wondering if you think that that's the wrong approach and if Trump should reverse that rule.
I don't think it's the wrong approach. I do think that you can, in the short term, control the flow of technology to China. What you can't do is, in the long run, control the dispersion of technology generally. I mean, there's no examples you can point to. When Pakistan decides they're going to develop an atom bomb, they do. And so, it gives us a little bit of a lead. The fact that they don't have ASML's most advanced lithography machines gives us a little bit of lead, but it's a little bit of a lead. It's not a big lead. And it doesn't work forever, right? Again, technology disperses.
And speaking of technology, you were actually one of the Democrats that opposed the bill force a sale or ban TikTok in the US last year. It passed, obviously. I'm wondering if you support Trump's decision to kick the can down the road on that.
It's a very weird position for me to be in because this had nothing to do with technology. I was just never going to vote for anything that was the federal government telling the citizens of the world's greatest democracy, you don't get to have access to this media. The Supreme Court decided that it was consistent with the First Amendment. With all due deference from this non-lawyer to the justices, I think that's bananas. Again, if we can't trust our citizens And maybe we can't, in which case we'll learn that in the next 5 to 10 years, with acting as democratic actors, able of being critical about the information that they get. We should hang up our spurs right now. So I was never going to vote to ban information or a media outlet, even though I'm probably one of the more cognizant people with respect to the nature of the Chinese threat there. But then, and here's why I'm in a weird position, daggone it, I'm not happy it became a law, but it became a law, right? So, and by the way, there's no provision for the president to just decide he wants to keep it on there. So, it's another example of something that worries me profoundly, which is, folks, laws are laws. There's no exemption in that law because the president really doesn't want to shut down TikTok, and that is, of course, where we are.
I wanted to ask you about Elon Musk, because obviously he's done a fair amount of business in China, and there was these reports about Trump blocking him from this defense briefing on China. Do you think that his business there and the fact that he has such access to government right now makes him a national security risk?
I think it's something you'd want to consider really carefully. I'm not going to tell you that that he should be forbidden from doing business in China. It's just we have these structures. We have a well-elaborated system to address conflicts of interest. And I have zero confidence, of course, that any of those structures or any of those protocols are in place with respect to Elon Musk. What really breaks my heart, I don't know the man, but I'm a congenital optimist. I thought at first, here's a guy who, whatever else you think of the weirdness, is a spectacular disruptor of things in need of disruption. Electric cars, launch, you name it. Starlink. And he could have come in his area of expertise, technology, and radically transformed the federal government. As people in this room will know, we have departments that are running stuff that was old when I was in high school in the 1980s, right? Running COBOL, stuff that kids today don't even know about. And he could have said, you know what we're going to do? Break things. In 1 year, we're going to migrate the federal government's operations out of these god-awful data. Wow. Mr. Musk, I apologize. My car's not going to work anymore, is it? He could have said, we're going to get out of these stovepipes, we're going to actually move the federal government, something we should have done long ago, onto the cloud, which A, is more secure, saves us tens of billions of dollars a year, and C, opens the door to actually bringing some AI applications onto federal data. Unfortunately, he gave into his worst, I just bought Twitter and I'm going to fire everybody to see what happens instincts with respect to the government. But what a lost opportunity.
And I wanted to ask you about Ukraine, because obviously, the administration's been pushing forward on trying to negotiate peace, and get Russia to stop the war there. I'm wondering, with all this news about Trump trying to push Ukraine to accept some kind of deal that recognizes Crimea as Russian, what's Ukraine's recourse if it resists that? Doesn't it eventually have to go along with what the U.S. wants?
No, it doesn't. Its predicament is far grimmer. I've been trying to suss out what the administration, what the vice president and the president mean we're walking away. Inside the Congress, there's a substantial majority that would continue to support the Ukrainians. That may not be enough, but that exists. And no, you can look at the British in World War II. The examples of David and Goliath, and David ultimately prevailing, especially when David is defending his homeland and his country and his people from an invader, are there. If what the president means is, because I didn't abide by my campaign promise to end this war in the first 24 hours, we're going to cut off all aid, that means that it's entirely Europe, and Europe can keep this fight up for some time. They can't probably reverse the military gains that the Russians have made, but they can extract a huge cost from Russia. Again, my view would be, let's, whatever else, put the Ukrainians in a better negotiating position. And for God's sake, don't offer up a peace plan that is capitulation. Because a plan that says you keep Crimea, you keep the current lines, you don't get security guarantees, and thank you very much for the minerals, that's not a peace plan, that's extortion.
I wanted to ask you about crypto too. You're one of many Democrats that's expressed reservations of the Trump family's crypto ventures, but you also recently decided to vote to advance the Republican stablecoin legislation. What do you think of the prospects of that? Is there anything that would cause Democrats like yourself to pull back fully on supporting that bill?
Well, it was a fairly small number of Democrats that supported it to start with. So no. Look, I think stablecoins is the easy part. Mm-hmm. Market structure is just hard. I was in the financial markets for a long time. I will tell you, it's really hard to get your head around the market structure bill that we're going to take on next. But no. Crypto broke my heart, right? I'm an innovation guy. I love innovation. I used to work with venture capitalists, et cetera. I love innovation. And so for 10 years ago, I thought, oh my God, crypto, I believe it. We're going to have non-hierarchical syndicalist structures. C Corps are going away, and we're going to disintermediate the payment systems and everything. And in 10 years, what actual applications have we seen out of crypto? Zippo. Now, by the way, all my friends in the industry are like, well, we're just 2 weeks away from, disrupting the remittances. Remittances, for God's sake, it costs 8% to send money to Guatemala, right? I mean, this thing is just sitting there waiting to be disrupted. So we're investing all this time and energy. The crypto industry has become this outsized political player. I mean, a lot of my colleagues, sort of should quake in their boots over the crypto money. But what have you actually done? And by the way, I don't say that to criticize. I say, my God, your challenge with the Congress would be made so much easier if you would actually have an example of an application or a product that made any of our constituents' lives better. So anyway, I'm promised that that's coming soon, but we'll see.
I'm going to give you one more opportunity to keep on your financial services hat. Representative Lucas told us this morning that he'd be willing to work across the aisle with Democrats on a bill to keep the Fed's independence, preserve that. Wondering what you think. What would you like that to look like?
Big of him. Who was it, Representative who?
Frank Lucas.
Okay, good. I'm glad to know that Frank Lucas is opposing the destruction of the American capitalist economy. So is the question, are we?
What do you? What would you like that to? Would you be willing to work on a bipartisan bill like that, and what would you like to look like?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think I know what's happening here, right? As a Democrat, I'm supposed to say, okay, the president is lawless, the Constitution is in flames, all we're going to do is resist. I know that's what I'm supposed to say, and I feel it. But look, I'm elected to advance the interests of my constituents. And damn right I'm going to fight hard on constitutional issues and raise hell when the law is broken, or suggest that maybe, my Republican friends should be a little concerned about what the next Democratic president now gets to do with law firms, universities, and private corporations. But no, look, again, this is not a popular view in the most angry corners of the Democratic activists, but my job is to try to advance the interests of my constituents in the country. So yes, I'll work on a bipartisan crypto bill, and damn right I'll work on, again, it sort of makes me laugh. Are we really going to litigate whether we should have an independent Federal Reserve? Because if so, we got a long way to go in terms of real bipartisanship.
Well, thank you so much, Representative Hines.
Thank you.
Really appreciate
Thanks, everybody.
Please welcome Steve Bannon, Chief Strategist to the 45th President and founder and host of Bannon's War Room, and Ben Smith, co-founder and editor-in-chief, Semaphore.
Well, thank you for joining all these globalists here at the World Economy Summit, Steve.
Honored to be here.
And I guess just to get straight to today's news, the markets are up I think the Dow's up 1,000 points on the suggestion that Donald Trump is going to totally sell you out and everything you believe about decoupling from China in exchange for, for keeping the trade flows going. I mean, are the markets up too much? Should people be selling if they believe that?
It's irrelevant to me, the daily trading of the stock exchange. It's irrelevant. The Chinese Communist Party has been at economic war with us for 20 years. And if you look at what they've broken, they've gamed the World Trade Organization, most favored nation, the cyber deal Obama cut with them in 2015, they never lived up to, the Hong Kong in 2019. They walked away. President Trump worked for 2 years with Lighthizer, had that amazing deal, took all the 7 original sins of the Chinese Communist Party economics away and integrated us into a total global economy. And they walked away. Li He and the team walked away in 2019. And so you've seen what's happened. They're at war with us. They've planned for this.
But so Donald Trump yesterday says that he's going to be nice to them. I mean, is there a turn here? Because it really looks like he is walking back from this idea.
I don't think there's a climb down. There's a fact, right when we walked in here, Caroline Levitt came out and says there's not going to be any unilateral walk down, right, to 50%. Now, I will tell you about President Trump. He went up the escalatory ladder quickly, right, to 125 and 145. But this is a long, tough process. So I think people trading on this every day is just the computers or the algorithms or folks. I think you have to see that he's bound and determined to, number one, treat this as a premium market, where if you don't bring your manufacturing back here, you're going to have to pay a premium to get to this market, like you buy a premium skybox at a sporting event or front row at a concert. He sees a premium. If you bring your manufacturing back, it's a different deal, but this is a long, tough fight. It's not going to be solved, and the media's running around the market, stock market this. It's very complicated, and we're dug in. And it's a battle between two systems. If you think their system's going to win, you're kidding yourself. It's not. We're going to win this. The American people are going to win it, and Lao Beijing, the common man in China, is going to win it also.
The main thing I wanted to talk to you about here, actually, is taxes. Because there's currently chatter in the Republican Party. Trump floated this in a meeting that Congress could wind up raising taxes or maintaining higher taxes on the upper income brackets.
For this audience?
For us, including perhaps a couple of people in here, in this tax bill, which is just absolute Republican kind of blasphemy. And first of all, I'm curious, what would you like to see? That they could just let the current bill expire and bring the top marginal rate back up to 39%. There's been talk of a tax on millionaires. There's been talk of a tax on $5 million or more in income. And you get, I think, more credit than you deserve for having really pushed this very loudly into
more credit than I deserve?
More credit than you get. You deserve more credit than you get. Sorry.
The walls.
There are many other places.
The true semaphore came out, right?
I was going to say, there are probably other places.
I just got Ben Smith in
other
public.
places where you get more credit than you deserve. But this one. But what do you? And I guess first of all, what do you think they should do?
I think they should do what they're talking about doing, because the only thing that makes the math work. This is not about Newt Gingrich and Grover Norquist and all these guys lighting their hair on fire about this is Bush in '92. It's not. Bush had a tax increase for everybody. This is a massive tax cut for working class and middle class people. Not only do you extend the tax cuts President Trump has, but no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security, that can lead us to other tax relief for the middle class and the working class. You've got to remember, the entire global system rests on their shoulders. They are the full faith and credit of the United States, not the Federal Reserve, not the SEC, not all of you guys, not the hedge funds, not the government. The people of this country, and they're beginning stiffed in a system that works against them. Remember, we've gutted out the United States from the high-paying manufacturing jobs, and yet the world system works with their security guarantee everywhere in the world, from NATO to the Middle East to the South China Sea up to Japan. It's their kids. So what should happen, and the only way the math works, at our growth rates, and the IMF says today it's 1.8 instead of 2.5, is you extend the tax cuts for the working class and middle class. You give them the additional tax cuts. And millionaires, I think President Trump's concept is the millionaire people making $1 million and above, so it's not the whole upper bracket, they increased to 40%. And I think the tax foundation's got up on Bloomberg right now. That's about $400 billion over 10 years. So it's $40 billion a year. And I think that's just the first, and this is not President Trump's idea, but I think the carried interest has got to go away. This whole phony thing about putting your stock in these foundations tax-free has to go away. I actually think there should be taxes on financial transactions. I think there's all types of populist economic policies. And with Dick Durbin announcing he's not running again, I think you see that MAGA is going to be here for a while, because I think he's basically telling you the Senate is not going to flip to the Democratic Party.
There's a massive skepticism on the Hill that that a Republican Party for generations was elected to cut taxes on every tax bracket, but a lot at the top.
That
we'll do
Republican
this.
Party is dead.
And when you
It
talk
died.
to
It's dead.
legislators, I mean, I think our Capitol Hill editor told me she would like literally eat her hat on a Zoom call if they do this because they're so dug in. Like, what are you getting back
behind
from
the
them?
scenes?
Yeah.
People understand because the math doesn't work. If you don't have massive cuts to spending, and I'm talking about discretionary spending, if you don't start the Pentagon and take a couple of $100 billion off the $1 trillion budget, if you then don't go to some of the discretionary social programs, like even a smart way to Medicaid, not to the entitlements, but unless you do that, the math doesn't work out. Look, the first half of the year, we've already had a $1.3 trillion deficit. I think this year, for the full year, is going to be $2.5 trillion. The current system we have is not sustainable. It's just not. We're kidding ourselves. You have to go to an alternative. I think the alternative is budget cuts, and I think you incentivize the wealthy here to get their lobbyists to start getting focused on budget cuts, and it has to be tax increases on the wealthy.
And who on the Hill do you think will fight for this? Anyone?
I think we can muster 25 or 30 people in the House, and I think a bunch of people in the Senate. Behind closed doors, they're all saying it's logical. Plus, if you see what's happening this week, if you take what we're doing to break up the oligarchs with the FTC suit against Facebook and what we're doing with the Justice Department on Google, if you add President Trump's tariffs and economic nationalism of bringing the jobs back, you add the tax cuts, that is populism nationalism. This is why our coalition grows every day. This is so hollow of what Bernie Sanders and AOC talk about. They run around on this break the oligarchs up. The Democratic Party created the oligarchy because all of those oligarchs were all progressive Democrats until 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the 5th of November. So they created it. President Trump's coming up with a solution. You've had everything that's happening. You see what populism nationalism stands for.
You mentioned Newt Gingrich, who I think posted this slightly confusing thing that he had some correspondence with Trump where he told Trump that if he raised taxes, it would be Bush 92. And Trump said, "You're right, Newt, I'm never going to do that." What do you make of that?
I think he said, "Oh, that's interesting." And maybe the thing he said, look, if that's the best Grover and Newt got to come with, they've lost their fastball, okay? That's a totally different time, right? We didn't have $37 trillion of debt. We didn't have $2 to $2.5 trillion in deficits. We're not adding $1 trillion every 100 days. Something's got to change and has to change fundamentally. That's this whole tariff trade battle. It's a fundamental reset of the geoeconomic strategy going with his reset of our geostrategic strategy of hemispheric defense. What Trump is doing, forget World War II, it's even more profound than that. It's probably before the First World War. You've had a massive change in both economic policy and a strategy coupled with a national security strategy. And now you see the details of antitrust at the Justice Department and FTC and FCC. You've seen economic and tax policy. So when Newt says Bush raised taxes on everybody, Trump is giving a massive tax cut to workers and middle class, and that's why we won when everybody said we were going to get beaten last November.
Yeah, and we had Ferguson here earlier talking about that. So I guess on the other side of the ledger, in a way, on the cut side, on the Tesla earnings call yesterday, Elon Musk said he can start to step away from his government work. Have you won? Like that fight?
It's not about personalities, right? I do support DOGE because you got to deconstruct the administrative state. If you want to get to deregulation, you have to deconstruct this choking administrative state that the Constitution, the founders never thought of. I think with Elon, what I do think we have to do, and we have to be very specific, before he leaves to go back to Tesla, he's going to hang around part-time, we need to have an accounting. He's questioned the integrity of the system, okay? Like Treasury is $6.5 trillion. They can't find all this. Social Security, IRS. We need to have a very specific accounting of what he found as far as fraud goes and waste. And I mean details. Treasury's got to sign off that, OMB's got to sign off, and every department head. We need to know exactly what he found because he went from $2 trillion a year to $1 trillion a year to $150 billion next year with nothing this year. None of this makes sense. The cuts you've seen that have been announced are programmatic. Whether it's USAID or DOE, that's a totally different thing. So I think you have to do that. And also, I think we have to have a letter of certification that not one data set or piece of data of the United States government or citizens of this country are held by anybody or any copies held except for the Trump administration and the U.S. government. And that has to happen, I think, in the month of May. And
sounds like you don't trust him not to take data.
Trust, but verify.
And just more broadly, though, it sounds like you're saying the Doge basically failed to find any cuts.
I think what they did,
and as you say, cutting USAID, cutting some people DOE isn't that.
They were a blunt force instrument, I think, and you've seen some layoffs, et cetera. I think it's what the administrative state needs. The administrative state is choking us down competitively, right? This whole thing runs, read the book Abundance, and not me saying this, Klein says it. The Democratic Party and the administrative state became so focused on process and not on outcomes. We can't continue like that. So I think in that regard, he came in as a blunt force instrument against the administrative state, not so much the deep state. Remember, we were our show, and we were keep saying, you got to go to the Pentagon. You got to go to the Pentagon. You can't be serious. If you're talking about waste, fraud, and abuse in our system, unless you're in the Pentagon, finding out how it really operates. And remember, they've been there 10 weeks and nothing. Okay, nothing. So
some things happened in the Pentagon.
But not related to well, the Chinese briefing, the war plan, but not related to look. What they're trying to do is important for all of us. We want to make sure we get the fraud out. We want to make sure we get the abuse out. We want to make sure the waste, but that's treated like some magic wand. It gets the hill off the hook. The country, we don't have any easy choices anymore. Remember when they talked about OMB where the money was and the meltdown? Our choices narrow every day, and here's why. The global bond market gets a vote. The bond market turfed out the Truss government in the United Kingdom, right, by doing a Reagan-type tax cut and not giving the numbers of what it really meant. We're not going to have those options anymore. Not at $37 trillion when you're adding $1 trillion every 100 days, and Scott Bessent has to refinance, I don't know, $10 trillion of it. You guys would know better. We are narrowing our choices and our alternatives. I don't care if it's Bernie Sanders and AOC or Donald Trump. As a country, we have to come to a solution to this. And what the Harvard and the colleges and the law firms show you, it's all federal money. The reason Paul Weiss cratered was because of the federal money. You're going to lose your security clearance. You're not going to be able to work federal jobs. By the way, there's one line in there. No client of yours is going to be eligible for federal funds. The same thing with Harvard. Harvard's all about federal money. Everybody's got their snout in the trough. And who pays for it? The little guy. That's why it's so frustrating. And here's the thing. The alternative the populist nationalists offer is an alternative that you can see the sunlit uplands. Tons of change has to happen. But the other alternative, I'm telling you, is this Luigi. The look at he's treated like a hero. He's treated like Robin Hood. That should scare you to the marrow of your bones, because that's the alternative. If the system keeps going like it is, that alternative is your alternative. We offer, the populist nationalists offer something you're not going to love, but you'll be able to live with.
How about that? One other person I want to ask you about is Scott Bessent, who I first, as a sometime Steve Bannon's War Room listener, that's where I first discovered Bessent. And you've known him for a while. You were a big supporter of hers coming to the administration. And I think he's emerged as the guy in the administration who, I know you don't care about the markets, but when he goes on TV, sometimes they don't go down.
Well, I care about the bond market a lot.
And I wonder, he reportedly, just today had a huge, maybe physical blowout with Elon Musk in the West Wing. What should people know about him?
First off, he's a safe pair of hands. I've known Scott forever, since I left the first term, and met him over at Hong Kong at a conference. We've been very close. He started coming on the show as a contributor a couple of years ago. Our two guys are really Russ Vought and Scott Bessent and Peter Navarro. All were the contributors for our show, because this is the type of thing. Our show's for a blue-collar, middle-class audience, but we talk a lot of capital markets. We try to teach people how the system actually works, that everything on cable TV, on MSNBC and Fox is all pro wrestling. Right, it's irrelevant.
But speaking of pro wrestling, there is currently, there was some story that they're tricking Navarro to go across the street so Bessent and Lutnick can run to the West Wing.
But that's
Bessent's having screaming matches with Musk.
That's the type of stories that get a lot of clicks.
It seems to me that Bessent has maybe
become.
Do you think he is now the most important player on that economic team? I mean, is he now basically the guy running the economy?
Well, not running the economy, but he's a safe pair of hands. President Trump's a very sophisticated businessman, but Scott is a safe pair of hands that understands capital markets deeply. He's done this for 30 years. He has a very strong sense of what markets need to hear as far as information go. Okay? Remember, the first fight, besides the H-1B visas and transhumanism, the first big fight we'd had with Elon was over Elon pushed Howard Lutnick, and Bannon in War Room pushed Scott Besson, and that got very nasty in Mar-a-Lago. They leaked all kind of stuff about Scott that was not true. And at the time, I said, for what President Trump's trying to do on trade, on tariffs, on taxes, on national security, you're going to need a steady Eddie, a rock, that the markets can sit there and go, that guy's telling me the truth. I may not like it, but he's telling me the truth. That's Scott Besson. And I'll be blunt. If Howard Lutnick had been Secretary of the Treasury, it would have been an unmitigated disaster. Okay? Unmitigated disaster. And this is about people putting their own interests first, like Elon, versus putting the nation's interests first.
Well, thank you, Steve. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Please welcome Sampath, CEO of Verizon Consumer, and Ben Smith remains on stage.
Wow, you know, we basically, when we were programming this, I thought that's going to be a really hard act to follow. Who do I know? Well, I won't, but anyway, thank you for, thanks for joining us, Sampath. And Sampath is one of the other most interesting people to talk to in the United States, though not at the moment leading a populist movement.
Yes.
It's a hard segue.
Yes.
But you guys.
I'm the phone company guy, you know. I run a phone company. It's not that tough. It's not that hard.
You know, I think it is pretty hard. And actually, I think I did want to start with something that we talked about the other day, which is the extent to which the phone company guy and everybody else, in a way that I think was less true a few years ago, is thinking about politics, is thinking about geopolitics, and it is, you know, at an event like this. And I'm curious. I mean, you've lived through that shift, and I'm curious how you, as a senior executive in this moment, kind of think about that balance.
Look, I think there are two things I look at. The first is, we're a large company, no surprise. Our strategy can be summed up in one sentence. We connect things and connect people.
Yeah.
That's it. There's nothing else we do. That's the sole strategy of what we do. Connect people, we connect things every single morning, evening, night, that's what we do. And when you go one step underneath that, we think the digital infrastructure that we are building, I mean, think about it, over the last 7 years, we've invested $200 billion in America. There's no other company I can think of who's invested $200 billion just in America to build infrastructure like we've done. We are totally committed. And we think a strong digital infrastructure, Ben, is the foundation of almost any technology that comes, whether it's AI, whether it's robotics, whether it's computational biology, it's computational geology, it's mapping. Anything you do requires a strong foundation of infrastructure. For me, it's fiber. For me, it's mobility. It's cloud, which means data centers. That's it. So we are laser focused on building that. And a little bit, sometimes we are in the Scotch business. It takes us 10 to 12 years to build this infrastructure out. So someone has to do something now so that 10 years from later, you have the world's best infrastructure there. Someone did that 10 years ago, which is why we have really good infrastructure now. That's how we think about it. We have a much longer arc of time we do because our projects take time. Look, in and out, there will always be what I call these skirmishes, but it happens every 4 or 5 years, but we are super committed to a long-term horizon.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. I mean, I think this is a moment when the stock market has not rewarded a lot of companies. Verizon, one of the very few, up maybe a few percent this year, partly obviously because of those domestic investments. I'm curious if you think that is a long-term shift, or as things stabilized, does the world go back to chasing Tesla and growth stocks?
Look, there'll always be this tension between value and growth. It's not new, it's going back as far as you can think of. Over the last 7-8 years, growth has been rewarded more than value. But look, we are going to be in business for a very long time. In a very long time because we have a resilient customer base, our infrastructure is really good. We have strong cash flows. We're one of the top 4 or 5 dividend-paying companies on earth. And then that includes some of the sovereign oil companies as well. So we're a really good stock. We love it. We have a really long-term view of it. But, markets shift between value and growth. And if I predict, I'm going to be wrong anyways.
You don't want to try predicting?
I think value is back in vogue, but I've always said that 8 years from now. And I've not been
so
right, so.
You're fine. It's a stopped clock sort of a situation slightly. You guys put out a report today, and you see an enormous share of everything happening across media, across digital media, across telecoms, and you put out this annual the report on hacking, basically, and digital malfeasance, which I think you reported was up 34%,
Yeah.
and that most of it is human involvement, which I think means that we're idiots, basically. What's new? What are you seeing in the sort of bad side of the digital
first,
world?
when your phone password is admin123, your password 123, it's a problem. So change that. But think
Is
about
that that's a substantial share of all hacking?
it is a lot, way more, and I'm going to get to that. Look, at the end of the day, we have, it's called the DBIR, Data Breach Investigation Report. We have access to 22,000 different security incidents that happened around the world. It's the largest collection of such reports. We work with agencies around the world to do that, and we look for trends. Couple of interesting trends. The first is the vast majority of breaches happen because someone wants an economic advantage. It's not the nation state stuff. It's because a criminal syndicate somewhere is trying to keep a loophole and get that. Almost 96% of it tends to be that. 3 to 4% tends to be nation state actors doing other more complicated things. So it's in it for money. It's a good way for criminals to make money. They don't have to move goods around. They can sit where they are and they can hack into people. The second is ransomware. It's gone up massively. Almost 40% of breaches involve some form of ransomware. The average ransom payment's also gone up, so that's the other thing.
What is the average ransom payment?
It's like north of $100,000. It's a lot of money. The third interesting thing, which is what you were saying, is most of them happen because of human vulnerabilities. People watch James Bond and all these shows where people hack into systems, but more often than not, it's a human vulnerability. Hey, what's your password? Someone tells you your password. Or someone calls and says, hey, I'm in your house, I want to deliver a package, can you give me the code to something, and you give the code. So it's phishing exercises, other things that leads to that, and it's gone up almost 30 to 40%. And it has a huge societal cost to it. And a lot of it is hygiene, corporate hygiene, as well as hygiene for personal individuals to do that. But every year, it becomes more and more profitable for the criminals to be in this space.
Growth industry. Is AI going to wind up giving the criminals superpowers, or is there some way to? Is this just going to get worse as we enter this AI era?
Yeah, look, it's two teams, both well resourced and well. It's like the playoffs between the Knicks and the Pistons that's going on right now. Two teams are doing very well. So if you think about it, let's start with AI. There are offenders and there are defenders. Let's start with AI for the defenders. Folks like ourselves. A couple of things we do. One is we have a lot of human manpower touching systems, tracking it, looking at vulnerabilities. You can automate and AI enable a lot of their tasks. So then they can be freed up to do more higher value work. The second thing is analytics. 2/3 of the world's data is unstructured data. It's emails, notes, Slack messages, text messages, random articles somewhere. And it's very difficult to put that in a database and analyze it. With AI, you can do that really well. You can look for patterns, you can look at vulnerabilities. So data analysis becomes extremely easy, and you can do this on the fly as well. The third is policy and compliance. When you write software, you have to go and attest 19 times, are you complying with this, are you complying? We don't need to do that. AI agentic code can go up and down your code base, track it, analyze it, and give you a score. So there are 3 or 4 really good things where AI helps the defender. But AI, unfortunately, helps the offender as well. Because earlier, they were doing manual. They would manually try and tap into you, look for a vulnerability in your social profile. But now with AI, they can set up these large bots that go and do thousands and thousands across all critical infrastructure and look for them. So this is going to be a cat and mouse game that's going to be played at a much higher gear right now. And look, it's important for society, it's important for governments that we take this very, very seriously.
There is a view, I think Matthew Prince from Cloudflare said this, that AI will ultimately favor the defender because you see every attack, but each attacker only sees one defense. Do you believe that?
I wish he was right, but the attackers too have, think about it, a single attacker sitting somewhere in a country, not in America, used to have X homes or X personnel they could attack. Now with AI, they've just increased their threat surface by 100x because they have these agents that can go and automate and look for vulnerabilities in your profile. They can scan everything you do and look for where are passwords weak, where is your policy weak. They can do a phishing attack, a spear attack. A lot of that can be automated. So unfortunately, it's a cat and mouse game. And I don't think I'm comfortable saying that the defenders get better at this.
No, that's too bad. It's a nice theory. I like to believe that.
Yeah, the Knicks are going to win still. So.
Well, we got that. I'm a Nets fan, so there's no hope. More broadly, there is this very intense, unbelievably expensive competition right now between LLMs. Yeah. Is that, which is adjacent to your industry? Is that healthy for this economy, or are we just lighting money on fire? What do you make of that? And by the way, and us and DeepSeek and the other Chinese LLMs too.
Look, I think DeepSeek was a good thing. It was a good thing, but China thing we may get to separately, but it was a good thing because in the value chain of AI, the LLM models were seeking too much rent. The model owners were seeking too much rent.
Well, they were spending so much money.
That's why they were seeking too much rent, because they were spending so much and the rent went up, so the cost per gig, the cost per hour of compute was crazy high. So now that DeepSeek has shown in some way that you could do it for less, there's going to be a lot of emphasis on taking cost out and doing it for less. And it does two very interesting things. When there's less rent seeking on the LLM portion of the value chain, a lot of value accrues to the top of the stack through applications. People for 2-3 years kept calling, oh, he's just a ChatGPT wrapper. Now the ChatGPT wrapper has value and enterprise value to do stuff because it doesn't have to pay so much rent to the LLM underneath.
Yeah.
Same with the infrastructure guys, guys like us who do the fiber and the connectivity, we weren't getting enough rent, but now there's less rent seeking in the LLM. So I think this democratization of profit pools across the value chain is really good. Good for folks building more infrastructure and folks for innovation at the top of the stack. So I think it's a really cool thing.
I guess just to go a little deeper, where do you think most of the value will wind up? One thing is, will a company like OpenAI ultimately be a valuable company, or is that going to be a sort of utility that barely ekes out a margin?
Look, I think most of the value will be on the top of the stack. In almost any industry, you think value always accrues to the top of the stack because the top.
So to translate that out of business school, what are we talking about here?
Yeah,
who's on the top of this stack?
Applications. So, for example, you have an open AI model that then has a wrapper that goes and does insurance claims for you. So, if you're an insurance company, I like that because it takes something complex, puts an agentic framework around it that goes and automates insurance claims or automates billing errors in my world, because we get a lot of billing errors, automates billing. And it's basically going to replace, for the last 20 years, we've had this huge explosion of B2B software SaaS companies. So that market is going to get massively disrupted because you're going to have these agentic frameworks that can do that at much lower price points with much less complexity. And they don't need the whole API structures. APIs are programming interfaces that were built over the last 20, 30 years, because an agent can just go look up a website, it can look up a code, it can look up a database and do what a human being would do. So I think there's going to be a lot of value accretion in applications, but in vertical applications, insurance, telecom, construction, healthcare, sports, technology. So in those vertical, and you're going to see that over the next 3 to 4 years, that's where the explosion is going to happen.
And do you anticipate a huge labor market disruption as well? Are there a lot of jobs? Some of those things you just described are now being done by people.
With any new technology, there's always some disruption, but new jobs get created. For example, prompt engineer. I'm in the market for any of you in prompt engineering space out there. Shoot me a note.
Liberal arts graduates, finally.
Yeah. So seriously, there's a job for you guys.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think there's a huge market in prompt engineering that didn't exist 3 years ago. So there will be disruption. There's going to be some reskilling, but new jobs will definitely take the space. Right now, AI can automate tasks. It cannot automate jobs yet. But between now and the next 5 years, it can start automating jobs. There will be some disruption nevertheless, but you have to reskill, and this is the right time to do it.
I was just talking to a PR person who was saying, well, we really want you to write a story about this so that the model will scrape it.
Yes.
And when people ask ChatGPT about our company, it'll hit your story because you have authority. And it isn't important to us whether any human beings read your story. It's like, well, I'm not sure what our business model is there, but it's an interesting
That Oxford
shift.
comma is not that important anymore.
I don't know. It might be an authority signal. Just a final question while we got another minute here on the kind of nuts and bolts of your business. Handset sales are slowing. Handsets, one of obviously the huge businesses of the last 20 years. You obviously sell a lot of them. Yeah. What's going on there?
I think if you think about it, there are 2 reasons why people buy new handsets. One, it broke. And the second is there's a new technology or form factor change. So let's go into both. Handsets now are a lot better than they were 5, 7, 10 years ago. The glass is better in the front, the glass in the back, even if you drop it, unless you drop it in the toilet, which more people do than we think.
Oh, I think seems normal to me.
Yeah, exactly. So they're built better. The handsets are built much better. Most companies, including ours, have insurance programs that replace handsets in a day. So less breakage. The second is there's not been much new form factor hardware in the handset space over the last couple of years. So combination of those two. Let me give you numbers. Back in the day, every 24 months, you guys got new phones. Then it became 36 months. Then it became 40 months. Now it's well north of 40 months.
It'd be like refrigerators. Like you buy one and...
Yeah. So, but I think new form factors are going to come. Like the foldable is an interesting form factor that came from the Samsung, Google.
We're slightly out of time, but in this scramble, who wins, who loses? Is that a huge problem for Apple? Like, who are the winners and losers of our refrigerator-like phones that we keep forever?
Look, I think companies like Apple and the others are also, back to my moving up stack, are moving into services, whether it's Apple TV, it's Apple Cloud, it's all the Apple Health, Apple Fitness. So they're getting more and more margin pool on services and applications that sit on top of the phone. Of course, the phone will be supremely important, and my sense is they'll keep innovating as faster. But innovation doesn't tend to be linear. It tends to be a little spiky. So every couple of years, you see a big innovation in hardware, not because they're not working hard. It's tough. It takes that many years to build the next thing. Even the hinge that folds the phone, there are like 60 different parts in that small hinge, so that folds into itself. So it's tough, it's hard work, it's hardware. So my sense is you're going to see innovation, but it's going to happen in a very spiky way.
Well, thank you so much for taking
Thanks,
the time.
Ben.
This was fascinating.
Thanks.
Please welcome Stephen Moran, Chair of the White House Council of Economic Advisors, and Liz Hoffman, Business and Finance Editor at Semaphore.
Hey, Stephen. Thank you for joining us on a busy news day. Starting with the news, the latest is perhaps a bit of a climb down on China in some sense that we are going to make a deal, though not unilaterally. And maybe you could just sort of level set with kind of where you see things right now at 4 o'clock.
Sure. So first of all, thank you very much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here, and thank you to all of you for coming to listen. I think that look, the president has said a number of times last week, earlier this week, the week before last, that he thinks we're going to do a deal with China, and I think the president has been very clear from day one about what he wanted to do and what he wanted to achieve, and he's been one by one fulfilling his goals and fulfilling his promises. So I'm optimistic that we will have a deal with China, and I'm optimistic that we will be able to take the temperature down a bit and provide both economies and the world breathing space. And I think that would be very healthy for our economy, for their economy, and for the global economy.
We had Ken Griffin here earlier, and he was talking about sort of brand America, the brand of the U.S. Treasury. We've put that brand at risk. It could be a lifetime to repair the damage that's been done.
Yeah, so I don't agree with that. I mean, look, at the end of the day, the brand of America and the desire to invest in America, to be in America, to hire in America, is all a function of economic opportunity. And President Trump and his administration are focused on creating the best economy America's ever had. And I think you got to look forward through what's happening now with tariffs to the trade deals that are being negotiated, to the tax relief that is being negotiated with Congress, not only the extension of the President's Tax Cuts and Jobs Act from 2017, which was historic and created a boom in the U.S. economy, but to the further tax relief that the President has promised to American workers and firms. And on top of that, the deregulatory agenda to unleash American industry, unleash American manufacturing, create American energy dominance. All of these on the other side of the volatility that's happening right now are going to create a fabulously strong economy. And the brand will follow that. Capital investments will follow that, hiring will follow that, and at the end of the day, I think Americans and CEOs and workers alike are all going to be very happy with where the economy is, later this year.
I want maybe to put a finer point in that. There's been a lot of short-term pain for long-term gain, and I wonder if you can maybe try to quantify a little bit how short-term, how painful. Like, what is the window that you are asking America to get through to some golden age on the other side?
Yeah, so there's a lot of rebalancing happening, right? And so from the very start of the administration, a number of sort of economic policy principles, including myself, have been emphasizing that the economy under the Biden administration was driven primarily by government spending. And so if you look at job creation in the second half of the Biden administration, 23, 24, after COVID is done, 73% of all jobs created were in government or government-adjacent sectors like education, healthcare, social assistance that survive largely with subsidization in one way or another from the government. And that was well over the 30%-ish number for those sectors in the Trump administration. So we've got to rebalance the economy away from government-driven economic growth to private sector economic growth. And on top of that, we've only started implementing our policies, right? 130 countries have expressed desire to start negotiations or are undergoing negotiations. There's a large number of written offers already on the table that are being negotiated. The tax bill is working its way through Congress, and I'm optimistic that it'll be passed within a few months. Enacted into law within a few months. And on top of that, the deregulatory agenda has made big progress already, but there's a lot more work to do, and we're going to continue making more progress on that throughout the course of the year.
I think one thing that people have had a hard time figuring out what the tariffs are actually trying to accomplish, because there's been a bunch of different justifications put out. You raise revenue, bring back manufacturing, eliminate deficits, put pressure on allies that perhaps we think are freeloading, crack down on fentanyl. And I understand that some of these fall under different sections of the Trade Act, but can you try to stack rank those a little bit? Because they each require a different, time frame and severity and sort of, they all require slightly different tariffs. So can you help us understand sort of what the actual goal is and kind of what's a nice to have?
Thank you. So I think that the overarching, there's two overarching goals. The first overarching goal is to create a fairer trading system in which American workers and firms are on a more level playing ground with our trading partners. Because in many cases, American firms are not allowed access to foreign markets, and yet we unilaterally allow all these firms access to our markets. There are trading partners of ours where American firms applied for licenses to enter the market 15, 20 years ago, and those licenses are still being reviewed, right? And so part of it is to create a fairer system in which American firms and workers are no longer getting the short end of the stick relative to how some of our trading partners treat us. The second overarching goal is about national security, right? And that's making sure that we have the ability to produce what we need in this country to keep ourselves safe and secure. America provides the world's defense umbrella, and we would be unable to do that if we couldn't produce tools for defense. So we need to make sure that we have the ability to produce the things we need to keep ourselves safe, but also to keep our trading partners, shipping lanes, and the trading system intact. If we can't do things like open the Red Sea for shipping for our trading partners, then we would be unable to have the trading system and defense umbrella we have. So once you get beyond the overarching goals, there's a series of individual tariff packages which each have their own aims and justifications, and some of them are about fentanyl, some of them are about sort of certain national security sectors, and some of them are about trade deficits, the national emergency that is trade deficits. They all have the nice side effect of producing revenue, as you said, which is very helpful in a time of large deficits.
Why are trade deficits a national emergency? We had them a year ago and 5 years ago.
Sure, trade deficits are a national emergency because they disproportionately affect tradable sectors, which means manufacturing. And as I said a moment ago, if you can't produce the tools to defend yourself, you've got a lot of problems. So trade deficits are a national emergency because they're inextricably linked with national security.
Are you worried that you talk about the president wants to bring back the best economy that America ever had, but to some people, he's trying to bring back the economy of the 1950s and 1960s. And are you worried at all that we're going to invest in kind of rebuilding a nostalgic American economy and just totally miss the boat on AI skills and training, whatever the sort of futuristic dystopian jobs of that era are, and that we're going to be looking back to a past that just doesn't exist anymore and missing an opportunity?
No, I don't worry about that at all, really, because I think that the administration is devoting a lot of resources to technology. We have entire teams at the White House focused on AI and crypto and other areas of innovation. We've got the Office of Science and Technology Policy headed up by my colleague Mike Kratsios. We've got David Sachs working on stuff. I think we've got a number of really talented people focused on high tech and the future of technology in ways that are going to be profoundly impactful.
But you've got China trying to get out of being the world's factory, and they're going to produce 2 or 3 times as many PhDs in STEM this year as we are. They don't want to be the world's factory. They want to be the world's brain. And we have this huge, you're talking about a trade deficit in goods, but we have a huge trade surplus in services. We provide all kinds of high margin, white collar services to the world. And I think there's some people confused about why would we want to go back to being a factory floor?
Thanks. So first of all, I think that the way you just characterize China's behavior is not super consistent with what they've done. In recent years, they've doubled down on manufacturing and on exporting their excess capacity and creating ever more excess capacity to export their goods to the rest of the world. So they may say that, but they are exporting a lot. But as I said a moment ago, I think national security plays a major role in thinking about trade. It certainly it's upstream of economics, which is something that I think most economists don't sufficiently appreciate. That you can't create an economy if you don't have a country with national security that can protect the institutions that make an economy possible. And while it's great to export services, and I'm all for creating maintaining our profoundly dynamic and world-class and top-of-the-world services industry and growing it even further, and in no way would I downweight its contribution to America. It's fabulous that we do lead the world in services, and we will continue doing so. But when you think about trade, if it's linked to national security, that's ultimately going to be about manufacturing, which means it's going to be about goods. And so services are critically important, but goods are critically important too. And we can't have all of our eggs in one basket and no eggs in the other basket. We need to make sure that we're diversified.
Wouldn't a smart country kind of trying to hit us where it hurts, not so much put perhaps retaliatory tariffs on a bunch of hard goods that we don't export or net importers of, and start taxing movies and apps and McKinsey PowerPoints, all the kinds of the intellectual property that we export all over the world? Is that a vulnerability?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, what I would say is that what we're trying to do is make the global trading system fairer so that Americans, don't bear as much of the cost for providing it as we do, and that the costs are partly borne by our trading partners who also benefit enormously from the global trading system. And retaliation sort of goes against the spirit of trying to make it fairer. We provide disproportionately for the world, and so we should try and improve the distribution of those costs, not exacerbate them. So I would view that as unproductive towards the goal of reaching the trade negotiations, which will allow the global economy to really flourish. And by the way, if these trade negotiations result in other countries opening their markets to our exports and buying more from the United States, I would love to get to a place where there's more trade, down the road, more capital flows down the road, because we're able to sell more and not just buy as much as we do.
You wrote in a paper last year, which at this point must be the most widely emailed and read academic paper in a long time. You wrote that the roots of economic discontent lie in the strength of the dollar, and the dollar is overvalued. It's down about 10% or so since the euro and some other things since March. Is this a good thing?
So let me first say that paper was written before my consideration for CEA chair, and it doesn't represent administration policy in any way. It also was a catalog of tools in which I tried to evaluate pros and cons, costs and benefits, risk and rewards for a variety of tools, and and dwelled on what could go right, what could go wrong. And it wasn't advocacy or a proposal for any.
So you won't be signing copies outside after, if anyone brought one?
No, I mean, look, I thought, look, what's the world of possible tools you might think that could, conceivably work to accomplish some goals, and then let's think about which of those tools are helpful, how you could sort of think about analyzing the risks and rewards of those various tools. But in doing so, it wasn't, a proposal or anything any more than somebody writing an economics textbook about the, where they write a section about the minimum wage and say, oh, well, it's got some goods, it got some bads. Doesn't mean they're advocating the minimum wage. So,
and I know policy and the level of the dollar is not your remit, but Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent today, I think, said something like, "There's more to a strong dollar than the exchange rate." What does he mean by that?
Yeah, so obviously, as you point out, the dollar is the purview of the Treasury Secretary and the President, and so it's not appropriate for me to comment on levels of the dollar or anything like that. But being the reserve currency does afford the United States, some fabulous benefits. We borrow more cheaply. We face less denomination risk because our imports are denominated in dollars. We can express our national security will through the payment system, and all of those are profoundly important benefits. And dollar dominance helps reinforce military dominance, which helps us protect the global trading system.
Time we have left. Let's talk about one piece of the Republican agenda or the Trump agenda that people expected and have not gotten a lot of is deregulation. And we had the FTC chair earlier on talking about antitrust, and most of what he said, I think you could have heard out of Lena Khan or any other Biden appointee. So what's the priority? What's the message to the business community if they said, wait, I don't think I got what I expected here?
Look, I think deregulation is of paramount importance, and I think economists dramatically underappreciate it because it's difficult to study. It's not quantitative. A tax rate is quantitative, an interest rate is quantitative. If you're a firm, you can face thousands of regulations, and they can compound and vary based on what you do, how big your company is, how old your company is, what jurisdiction you're in, how cozy you are with your local regulator in order to get regulations more laxly enforced. And all this is very difficult for economists to study, so they don't study it. But it determines the supply side of the economy, which is another way of saying it determines long-run potential GDP growth. I think that the deregulation that we're going to accomplish in this administration is going to be worth 30 to 90 basis points of GDP growth, of potential GDP growth, of disinflationary GDP growth, because it pushes the supply side of the economy out in order to accommodate increased demand over the course of the next decade. And if you look at the deregulation that the Trump administration has already accomplished in its first 100 days, preventing certain Biden administration regulations from taking place, particularly around transportation, as well as peeling back a number of, but overwhelmingly the benefits come from peeling back Biden-era transportation regulations that's happened so far. It'll save an American family of four $1,100 a year over the next decade because deregulation makes it easier to produce. And when you think about the long run, right, what we want is companies to build factories here. We want them to build firms here. We want them to open businesses. We want them to hire. And that means we need to get government out of the way and stop the permitting process from taking 7-9 years, even more, to break ground to do something. We want people who have an idea, who want to invest, who want to create value in the American economy to just be able to do it. And if we can do that and we can get them out of the way, we're going to create an enormously flourishing economy. And I think that's one of the most important things.
It's interesting that most of the talk right now about supply side economics and deregulation is coming out of Democrats. This is a big abundance agenda that has really caught on kind of in the pro-building progressive left. And I don't know, is this an opportunity because it's bipartisan, or is the White House seemingly focused on tariffs and other things just going to lose this issue?
Oh, no, we haven't lost it at all. I think, we've been barreling full steam ahead on taxes and deregulation this entire time. And, I do like to point out that imports are only 14% of the economy. So all this tariff stuff really is affecting a very small part of the economy, whereas the tax relief and deregulation is going to affect the entire 86% of the rest of the economy. And so therefore is arguably, even more powerful. But we've been barreling ahead on this stuff. And I think it's been, people talking about it that have disproportionately focused on tariffs. There's potentially a variety of reasons why, but we have been full steam ahead on dereg and tax relief, and that's going to bear fruit for American workers and firms.
Most of the president's tweets are about tariffs. Maybe that's why. I mean, he's directed a national conversation towards this.
Well, the conversation always goes two ways, and other people talk about something, and he very often responds. So.
Very briefly, the tax bill that's going to come down. What do you expect to be in it?
So the president has promised, so first of all, we will extend the president's historic tax cuts from 2017. The first Trump economic boom was powered in large part by tax cuts, and the second Trump economic boom will also be powered in large part by tax cuts. But there will also be the further tax relief that the president promised on the campaign trail. Things like no tax on overtime or Social Security or tips, further tax relief to incentivize American firms to invest in America. The House and the Senate each have their own sets of priorities as well.
All right. Well, listen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Please welcome Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer of New York and Burgess Everett, Congressional Bureau Chief at Semaphore.
Senator Schumer, how are you,
Hi,
sir?
Burgess. How are you?
Thank you for joining us today. We
My
really appreciate
pleasure.
your time. So we'll start with the biggest news in your caucus today is your former roommate and your whip, Senator Durbin, is announced he's not running for re-election today. How does that affect your job, and how are you feeling about that, and how are you reflecting on this long career you guys have had working together?
Yeah, well, today's Dick Durbin's day. And let me just say, he is one of the greatest, not only senators I've ever met, but one of the greatest people I've ever met as well. He is somebody who was a great and an amazing, smart legislator. But I think what stands out the most is his compassion for people who need help. You could just see it. When he heard a story of someone in trouble, his instinct was to help them legislatively or back in Illinois or whatever. His passion, for instance, for the Dreamers was incredible. He would get on the floor every day and give a speech and show pictures about these Dreamers because he cared so much about them. And everyone in the Senate knew when Dick Durbin got up to speak for something, it wasn't to seek political advantage for himself. It was much rather because his heart was, he had a great brain, a great soul, but an amazing, amazing heart. And of course, he's a dear friend, as you know. I lived with him for more than 20 years in the famous rooming house that George Miller was the landlord of. I used to tell people I've lived with my wife. These were a few years ago, 35 years, George Miller 33 years, and Dick Durbin 30 years.
He said you were a little messy, though.
Yeah, he was much more of a neat freak than I was. But he tolerated everything because he was such a decent guy. I can't think of a thing bad about him except one. We had 2 bedrooms upstairs. Miller, the landlord, got one. And unfortunately, Durbin had the other. So I had to sleep downstairs, in the sort of place that had the kitchen and the living room, on a couch for a while. Then later we finally got a bed. But I never got that bedroom because of Dick Durbin. That's the only bad thing I could say about him. I've talked to him yesterday and the days before. He will be missed in every way, but leaves a giant mark. Love the guy, love the guy.
So I just actually reported that Senator Schatz, who's the chief deputy whip, he's been making some calls today to Democrats about the whip position. Do you support him for that role at this point?
Look, today's Dick Durbin's day. I'm talking about Dick Durbin.
Okay. You've been back home in New York for the past 2 weeks where we've been on recess. You know a lot of folks in the business community in New York, Wall Street, et cetera. What are they telling you about Trump's economic plans and the tariffs specifically? Are people...
They're aghast. They're aghast that this man has so mismanaged an economy that was given, that was in good shape when he took office. They're aghast about the lack of thinking of how these tariffs work. They're aghast at the chaos, different people saying different things every day. You talk to business people, it could be big business people, small business people, or anyone in between. They need some kind of certainty. They don't have it. And they're aghast at the foolishness of the plan. If you want to go after China, you don't attack everybody else in the world and ally them to China. But I'll tell you, as much as Wall Street is upset, our people upstate are upset. We have 7 Republican districts in New York State. I was in 6 of them over the last week talking about the reconciliation bill, which will, in a sentence, make the middle class pay for tax cuts for billionaires, and particularly, on Medicaid. I was at nursing homes where people would lose their jobs. People would lose the ability to be in a nursing home because they're 60, 70, 80% funded by Medicaid. One of the biggest hospitals in the Bronx told me that they'd close if these Medicaid cuts were done. They're talking about Social Security. They're talking about veterans. And on the tariffs, yesterday I was in Albany and Syracuse at a bunch of restaurants and small business owners. The restaurants have to pay much more for their imports of many different kinds of things. They're worried about closing. In New York, they're worried that the Canadian tariffs prevent tourists from coming. It's huge for our tourist season. And we had a pool manufacturer. Manufacturer's upset. This guy gets he's the biggest pool, not a manufacturer, but he installs the pools. And it's a great company in Albany. It employs over 300 people. He's going to lose out a lot of business in Canada, and he's going to have to charge more because of Canadian imports. And many of the people I talk to are Republicans. So let me say this, Burgess. It is no wonder that we Democrats are unified on our message. We're not for tax cuts for billionaires and cutting Medicaid, Social Security, Medicare, veterans, etc. They are, and they're in disarray. You have House Republicans. 4 of the 6 congressmen whose districts I went to sent a letter to Johnson saying, don't cut Medicaid. Well, how the hell are they going to do that when the right wing is demanding even deeper cuts than the $880 billion that's put down for the Energy and Commerce Committee, most of which would be Medicaid?
Yeah, we even heard
fighting.
Mike Lawler was distancing himself just yesterday from the idea of making states pay more of the federal share on Medicaid.
Yeah, well, I was in his district, and he called up a newspaper and screamed at him for covering me, talking about his Medicaid position. But then he was not one of the original people on that letter, but then he signed it, of course. They're all feeling the heat. And ask yourself this simple question. Why are Democrats so unified and Republicans in such disarray on this reconciliation bill and on the tariffs, but on the reconciliation bill? Why are House Republicans fighting with other House Republicans? Why are Senate Republicans fighting with other Senate Republicans? And amazingly enough, why are the 2 leaderships not on the same page? I'll tell you why. Because the policies are so damn unpopular with the American people, and not just with Democrats, with independents and Republicans I've met across the state as I've traveled the state the last week and a half.
Well, Senator, I mean, you're a China hawk. You supported President Biden's China tariffs as well. Do you support President Trump's China tariffs, or at least what he is trying to achieve in taking on China?
Look, targeted smart tariffs make sense against China. I was for them then, I'm for them now. What Trump did is chaos and disaster. He's turned the whole world against America, and China's seeking alliances and seeking to take advantage of the stupidity of the Trump tariffs. And that's why you even have such dissent in the administration. Navarro wants to go against these tariffs, wants to impose these tariffs all the way. Some of the more business-oriented people say, do this, do that. They don't even have a consistent plan. And as I mentioned, businesses, whether they be huge businesses, whether they be financial services in New York City or the small businesses upstate, they need some kind of certainty. And they don't get any certainty at all with Trump. So the American people, you saw this YouGov poll today or somewhere, that they're losing total faith in his ability to run the economy. The guy who said, on day one, I'll start reducing your costs, has raised their costs. The tariffs, by the way, we estimate, the fellow on before, I don't know who it was, but I just heard him. He said, who was it?
Stephen Mirren.
Oh, he said it's only going to raise your prices 14, or, it's only 14% of the economy.
Right.
We estimate that the average family will pay more than $4,000 a year with Trump's tariffs as they are now. The average IRA has lost close to $100,000. Go tell that to average people that they shouldn't worry about that, to working class families that they shouldn't worry about that. They're worrying, baby. They are really worrying.
Are the tariffs, I mean, Democrats obviously had a tough election in 2024 and have been kind of, in the wilderness a little bit for the past 6 months. Are the tariffs giving you all an opportunity politically, and how are you dealing with that as you try to take the Senate back?
Well, look, we had 3 things going for us in the last week or two, now a 4th. We first had the Signal Gate, total incompetence of the administration. Then now we have the reconciliation, which we've been pounding away at and already making Republicans pay a price for sticking with the Trump plan. And now we have the tariffs. And so it just keeps piling on. So yes, Democrats, we are on our front foot. We are on offense. We are fighting the Republican proposals that so hurt working families across America. And they're on their back foot fighting with each other and not really knowing what they're going to do.
You took a lot of heat from your own party for your vote to advance that government funding bill. Do you feel like you've been vindicated, given that if the government could still be shut down today if you all had voted against it?
Look, I did what I thought was the right thing to do. Sometimes as a leader, you have to take a bullet to do the right thing, which it was clearly, I think, the right thing for the country and for us. But we're all moving forward now. We're all united. My caucus is totally united, no matter which way people voted on that proposal, to go to show the American people how Trump has betrayed them how Trump is on the side of the billionaires club, not on their side. And we have great unity in our caucus, and I think it's terrific.
Do you take any of this talk, polling, et cetera, about AOC running against you in 2028? Do you take that seriously? How do you deal with that? What's your reaction to it?
Polls always come and go. I'm focused on making sure the people of New York and the people of America know how bad Trump is. And I have found throughout my career, you do your job and everything works out just fine.
Are you ready to announce that you'll be running for another term yet?
I'm focused on letting people know how bad Trump is.
Let me ask you about. On that point though, a few months ago when we last talked, you said that President Trump had sort of alluded to maybe meeting with you at some point at the White House. You guys got some deals done together in his first term. Has there been any talk of you being able to meet with him, work with him, any of those things?
He said when he met me, he said he wants to meet. He hasn't called up. He hasn't set up a meeting at this point. I'll certainly meet with him, but if I meet with him, I'm going to tell him how bad his policies are for the American people, and ultimately it'll be bad for him because the people do not like what he's doing. They hate it.
Are there aspects of the Trump tax cuts for middle class and lower income earners that you would like to keep in place moving forward?
Look, we have to look at the whole package. And if such a high proportion of the money goes to the wealthiest people in America, that package can't be defended. And the American people know that. About 80% of the people don't like tax cuts for billionaires, particularly when the middle class is paying for it on programs vital to them. And one other thing, Burgess, like Medicaid. I don't know, some of these Republicans, they don't realize that Medicaid is not only a program for poor people, and I'm glad it is, they need help. But it's also a program that hurts the middle class. I was on Staten Island in Maliotakis' district. And we were there, and we were at nursing homes. And the head of the nursing home, very nice man, said, if I have to close with these Medicaid cuts, these middle class families who live on Staten Island, they're not going to know what to do for their parents. Their houses aren't big. You can't really move your mom back in home. They need different kinds of medical care. Kids can't do that themselves, but they can't afford it. It's just crazy. So, what they're doing in obeisance to the billionaires club is really hurting middle class people. And every day, more and more middle class people are learning that.
I mean, it seems like, though, in the Senate at least, you have 4, possibly way more senators uncomfortable with cutting Medicaid. You have relationships with some of these Republicans. Do you think ultimately the Senate Republicans are going to say, we cannot do this?
Well, there are some of them who are saying that and have said it publicly, but they're divided. For everyone who says you can't do it, you got somebody else in the Senate caucus, Republican caucus on the hard right saying, it's not enough. We got to even do more. That's why they're so stuck. They're just stuck.
Well, they also have the debt ceiling in their reconciliation package right now. They may have to pull that out and ask for your help. Are you willing to give that to them?
Look, right now it's in their package. We'll have to see what they do with it.
Right. So you're not ruling that out entirely if they need your support.
I'm just saying it's in their package right now. I'm not negotiating in any way. Let's see what they do with it.
We have time for one more question, and I love Senate races, and you're somebody who shares that love with me. You guys have a tough map. You got to pick up 4 seats. Right now, I know you don't have candidates in line, but do you feel like if the election were to be held now, would you be majority leader? Do you think you'll be majority leader in 2027?
In 2027, I believe I will. Trump is alienating people left and right. And we are, people said, oh, it's a hard map. I remember what they said in 2020, he'll never become majority leader. And then we surprised him and won 2 seats in Georgia. People, and I think in this election, we are going to be in the majority in 2027 because first, people know that we are fighting for working families. But just as importantly, maybe even more importantly, they're not going to want the Republicans who embrace Trump. They're going to desert, the electorate will desert the Republican candidates who embrace Trump in an overwhelming way.
Senator Schumer, thank you so much for joining us and giving us 15 minutes of your time. We appreciate you.
Burgess, you have always been an excellent reporter.
Thank you, sir.
please welcome Steve Ratner, Chairman and CEO of Willett Advisors, and Matthew C. Klein, founder and publisher of The Overshoot.
All right, thank you, Steve. You obviously have a lot of experience in the markets. The past few months have been quite unusual, where we see, individually maybe no move is that odd. Stocks going down, bond yields going up, currency going down, but at the same time, it's been quite strange. What do you think is happening? What's driving that?
You think it's unusual what's going on out there? No, I'm kidding. Yeah, look, it's obviously been very strange. It's been very volatile. I'd like to think, while predicting stock markets and things like that is always unbelievably difficult and nobody gets it right more than kind of 51% of the time, now we're being asked as investors to predict what's going to come out in the latest tweet or the latest Rose Garden appearance or latest comment in the Oval Office when he's greeting some foreign leader. And it really is very, very tough for us to focus. And look, the economy is clearly slowing down. People are and I think we have some slides. Are we going to put those up there, or what are we going to do with them?
So we've seen a downgrade in growth forecast.
There we go.
Yeah.
That's what I was looking for. So, I like charts, and I think, pictures worth 1,000 words and all that, so you get fewer words and more charts. So what this basically shows you is what's been happening. These are Goldman Sachs projections, but if you look at probably any of the major forecasters or investment banks, you'd see something similar, which is back what they thought in 2020, which was that growth would stay between 2 and 2.5%, which was ironically where it was at the end of the Biden administration when Trump said it was an economic disaster. And then you can see that they've been slowly downgraded and downgraded. And right now, I think the conventional wisdom, which I wouldn't disagree with, is that there's 50 to 60% chance that we're going to have a recession. Clearly, consumers are slowing down. We can go to the next slide if you want.
Yeah.
There we go. So if you look at consumer sentiment on the left, this is the black. Let's focus on the black line for a second. This is the lowest reading of consumer sentiment, except for 1 month in the whole time that they've collected this data. You can also see all the way on the left that when Donald Trump left in 2020, right before COVID anyway, we were at 100, and now you can see how far down we are. What's interesting also on the left, and it's going to be true on the right in a second, is that what you think depends a lot on who you voted for. You can see that back during Trump 1.0, more Republicans were optimistic than Democrats more optimistic. Now it's flipped around. Republicans are more optimistic and Democrats are very, very pessimistic. But on average, people are, as I said, at a record level of pessimism. And on the right, you can see a large part of why, which is inflation. And that the average American thinks inflation is going to be 6 or 7% in the coming year. That's not what the professionals think, but it's in a way more important what consumers think because it affects their behavior. And again, you can see the same political thing where it's sort of flipped around after the election. And so basically people are pulling back. People are not going to spend money right now. And you see this, we're just starting to get first quarter earnings reports from public companies, and they're all basically saying consumers are pulling back. They're not sure what's going to happen. They just don't want to spend money, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
So not to be too obvious, to hit this too hard in the head, but what exactly is actually driving this change in behavior? Because as we can see, it's very sudden just over the past couple of months. So what kind of specific policy changes do you see causing all this?
I think it's a mix of two things. I think in terms of specific policies, it's tariffs, tariffs, and tariffs. I don't think most Americans had ever heard of tariffs before, and here's tariffs, had ever heard of tariffs before this election campaign and then Trump's arrival. He did some tariffs in his first term. Biden took some of them off and put some others on, but it really wasn't in the consciousness. This is the average tariff rate on all of our imports. And you can see that essentially in the post-war world, the world decided that fewer tariffs were better than more, that free trade was a good thing, that it allowed consumers to get cheaper, better products from other places. And so it went down, 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 and it was about 2.5%. You can see all the way on the right before it jumps up, you see a little upturn during Trump 1.0 and a little downturn during Biden, who took some of them off, as I said. And now you can see where we are. We're back to roughly 1909 levels. Many of you probably studied the Smoot-Hawley tariffs in school. People sometimes, as a shorthand, say they caused the Depression. They didn't cause the Depression, but I think every economist pretty much, except at the very fringes, would tell you that they significantly exacerbated the Depression. So you can see they came down, down, down. And so tariffs, I think, are the biggest thing. The second thing is just the uncertainty, that every day something different happens. The stock market has been unbelievably volatile. Can't remember volatility like this in the recent past anyway. And so I think it just makes people very destabilized and uncertain. And when you're uncertain, you pull back.
So the argument that you hear from the administration officials, I mean, we just heard Steve Moran a couple minutes ago, is that we should look through this, that actually the tariffs are going to ultimately be better for American companies by improving the competitiveness of making things in the United States. Why do you think markets disagree with that?
Well, if that were true, you would have CEOs out there basically saying this is a really great idea and we're really glad you're putting tariffs on. But other than a few people who have found some self-serving piece of it that they want for their own particular business, no CEO that I know of is saying that. They're all saying this is really bad. And what's also bad about them is they're indiscriminate, that it's basically across-the-board tariffs on everything. You know, he started with tariffs on steel and aluminum. Well, if you want to make stuff here and you raise the price of steel and aluminum here, it makes us less competitive, not more competitive. So some car parts guy out in Ohio, he's got to pay more for his steel, more for his aluminum. And so if you really wanted to just sort of target some industries and say we want to develop these industries here, and by the way, Alexander Hamilton was in favor of that if you read his report on manufacturers, that when you have young industries, maybe semiconductors is a good example of that, tariffs are not crazy, but to put them on across the board, I mean, why do we have 54% tariffs on Lesotho? I mean, what has Lesotho done to us that justifies tariffs at that level?
That's right. And I think one thing interesting is the way the reciprocal tariffs have been temporarily paused, right? And yet, nevertheless, the tariffs on China are now incredibly high. And as you mentioned, some of the things we import from China, maybe you could argue the national security case is why you'd want to import less. But at the moment, anyway, there's an extremely high dependence on the imports of, for certain kinds of goods, including the things that are in no way national security, like toys, for example. I mean, again, I'm just trying to, not that you are crafting administration policy, maybe you could walk through
I'm certainly not crafting administration policy. I don't want anyone to think I am, because I would disassociate myself.
Absolutely, but I mean, just walk through kind of how that.
Look, China is a really tough case. We have done a lot of investing in China. I go there once or twice a year. I am both admiring of what they've accomplished and not happy about some of the ways they've accomplished it. They are not fair actors. They use government subsidies. They use other kinds of what we call non-tariff barriers, ways to restrict other countries or other companies competing with them, and so forth. But that said, what they have accomplished, their ability to produce things. I'll give you an example. I worked on cars at one point, and the Chinese were never really good at building cars. Well, now they are. BYD builds cars that are viewed as being at least as good as our electric cars, and at a fraction of the price. Now, we have 100% tariff on Chinese cars, so there aren't going to be any BYD cars here. But they got a big market share in Europe before Europe put tariffs on them. And they're really good. I mean, the Chinese people work really hard. They don't get paid a lot. And I'm a capitalist, but there's something sometimes to be said for state-directed capitalism, because they can focus on an industry and basically say we're going to. But in any event, this chart. So when you want to talk about what consumers are going to feel, it's not just going to be prices. This country could feel, and I'm going to exaggerate slightly, kind of like the Soviet Union in the 1970s, where you go into stores and there are empty shelves, because all this stuff on the left is stuff that we either don't make here at all, or we make here in very, very small quantities. Obviously, iPhones, people get a lot of attention, but we get to Christmas and toys, and 90% of our toys, and bicycles aren't on here, but it's the same for bicycles, are made somewhere else, and you can see a lot of them are made in China, not just China. Things like shoes and clothes, Vietnam and places like that have become very good at making that kind of stuff. But that's what we're facing. So it's not just price, and I thought what you were going to say, that Steve Myron talked about how it's only 14% of our GDP, but it's all this stuff.
Right.
That either people aren't going to be able to get it all. Oh, so China. So look, China, we're really in a death struggle with China on this. And I know Trump today or yesterday said, well, we're going to do some stuff and it's going to be okay with China, and I want to talk to Xi, but Xi doesn't want to talk to him at the moment. Look, China's attitude is a bit like, we're big boys now. We have a GDP that on a PPP basis is as big as yours. We're not going to get pushed around by you. And when Vance called them a bunch of peasants, that didn't really help anything. And so it's a bit of a death struggle there, and I'm not sure how that one ends. Nobody's going to buy anything from China with 154% tariff on it. It's just not going to do it.
I want to get back to you talking about cars, because as you said, you have some real experience there. And one thing that's been interesting is that unlike some of the other tariffs that are on all goods, there's specific sectoral tariffs on cars and parts. And when those were announced, you saw two things that were interesting. One is that American headquartered car companies, so Ford and GM, the stock price did not react well. And you also saw the head of the United Auto Workers Union praising the tariffs. So maybe you can kind of explain the dynamics there and how you think it's all going to play out.
The president of the UAW hated the car tariffs. Loved the car tariffs, but hated all the other tariffs. Kind of where you stand is kind of where you sit, or the other way around. But in any event, there's a lot of self-serving stuff. I don't think the car companies particularly like the tariffs. The U.S. car companies, GM and Ford and Stellantis, if you want to think of them as a U.S. company, because what this chart shows, and I'm not sure the president fully understood this, is that when we had, after NAFTA, when we basically had free trade with Canada and Mexico, companies, and not just car companies, sourced stuff wherever it was cheapest. And so a lot of car stuff gets made in Canada, a lot gets made in Mexico, and one of the things I learned in my car experience is that the Mexicans build, as workers, build really good cars. They're very good workers, and they get paid a tenth of what our auto workers get paid. So a lot of production, even for GM and Ford, has moved south of the border. And what this shows, which I also didn't know until I got in the car business, is that as you make a car, parts go back and forth across the border multiple times. Like a steering wheel assembly, the steering wheel might get made in Canada, the shaft might get made in Mexico, then it goes somewhere else, and they add another piece, and it goes back and forth like that. And so why the car company stocks have not reacted well is because this is going to increase their costs as well as the costs for other car companies.
And the UAW didn't know that? What's the...
Well, the UAW is focused on jobs in the U.S., and it is true that if you put tariffs on imports into the U.S., you are going to create more jobs in the U.S., but you're going to do that at the expense of car prices being higher for American consumers. And so there were studies done, like, for example, on the steel tariffs that Trump put in Trump 1.0, and I don't remember the number, but it was hundreds of thousands of dollars per job saved. And so we can't deal with special pleadings. And I have a lot of affection for the car industry, but we can't have every consumer in America pay more, frankly, just for some car workers.
Right. So, last question. One of the arguments that has not been as made explicitly, but maybe is a motivation for these tariffs. If you do this sort of back the envelope math and you say, okay, goods imports are about 11% of GDP, the tariff rate we showed earlier is about 26%, with some tax increase, assuming no change in goods imports volumes, is something like 2 percentage points of GDP, which, given the size of the budget deficit of 6% of GDP, that's a meaningful amount. And I wonder to what extent Republicans in Congress might be thinking, well, we don't have the political capital to do the kinds of spending cuts necessary to really, contract the budget deficit in a meaningful way, or tax increases for that matter. So this is sort of to keep their hands clean. What's sort of your view on that?
So the idea is we're going to add a couple of points to inflation, put the country into a recession in order to raise some revenue to deal with what you're seeing on the screen here. Look, we went away from tariffs and instituted a federal income tax in 1913, plus or minus, because it was recognized that tariffs are highly regressive. They hurt people at the bottom more than at the top. They're not a good way to collect revenue. And we basically, over the last 100 years, have made that substitution. And so to go back seems crazy to me. We do have a huge budget problem. This is, I guess, our last point in our final 30 seconds. And frankly, there's no courage on Capitol Hill, certainly among the Republicans, to do anything about it. The green bars are what the deficit would be on kind of present course and speed on the right side of the chart. And the blue is what the House passed, which was $2.8 billion, as you see on the left in the red, of additional, $200 trillion, over 10 years, of additional debt. And then the Senate kind of piled on and said, well, let's make it $5.8 trillion. And so the amount of additional deficits and debt that the Republicans on the Hill at the moment have provided for dwarfs all these other plans here. In fact, you can add most of them up together and you still won't get to $5.8 trillion. All the stuff that the Republicans, sorry for ending on a partisan note, but all the stuff the Republicans bash the Democrats about, the IRA and the infrastructure bill and all this American Rescue Plan, all that stuff adds up to less than what they're talking about doing now. And look, this is the biggest, not to end so much on such a down note, but this could be our biggest existential problem at the moment.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Please welcome Calvin Butler, President and CEO of Exelon, and Vijay Vaidyanathan, Global Energy and Climate Innovation Editor at The Economist.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Calvin.
Vijay, good to see you.
Likewise. So we are here at a very propitious moment, at a propitious gathering. We are entering an age of energy abundance, I am informed, by the powers that be. And yet, here we are in the security track of this three-day jamboree, talking with, we have the pleasure of having here the CEO of the largest utility in America by customer base. So, Calvin, welcome to the stage.
Thank you.
What does it mean to think about security? Again, a lot of defense-oriented thinking now, but we are entering an age with increased awareness, increased concern, but also increased investment, and maybe even some rethinking of how we define security from the energy perspective. How are you preparing for the security challenges that the electric power sector has?
So, Vijay, I think you've captured the nuances that involve it, because depending on who you speak with, they will define energy security a different way. And it all matters about where you sit. So let me just, from an industry perspective, I will tell you how we frame it. First thing you think about when you think of security, you think either physical or cyber security and the attacks on the grid. The grid is considered critical infrastructure. So therefore, we know that nation states and terrorists and so forth, when you go into any type of conflict, the first thing you want to do is to attack the grid to create chaos. So that's always our first priority, a safe and reliable and secure grid. But now the term energy security is being tossed around, do we have enough power, electrons, to meet the growing needs around data centers, AI, chip manufacturing, and the like? Because the thought is, if you do not, that manufacturing will occur offshore, i.e. creating a security issue on information and technology within the United States.
So it's interesting, we're getting a mission creep now of what electricity needs to do. There is a Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? We all need to have cold beer, hot showers. We don't think much about electricity coming from the walls.
Exactly.
Until you do, until the power is cut. But now we're in an electrification super cycle. The IEA, the Energy Agency, predicts we're going to see a dramatic increase in electricity as an end fuel for factories you alluded to, as well as AI data centers, as well as various other, ultimately for electric vehicles around the world.
Yes.
So how do you get ready for this in terms of the grid infrastructure providing the backbone to this?
Well, I think in terms of, for those who know the energy sector, the combined investor-owned utilities in the United States will invest over $200 billion in infrastructure capital this year alone to get it done. And you think of my company, of Exelon, we will invest over the next 4 years $38 billion. Investing in capital, $9.1 billion this year alone.
That's across several states that are your districts.
It is. So the nation's capital, D.C., is one of our utilities, Pepco. And our largest utility being in Illinois, Commonwealth Edison, PECO in Philadelphia, Baltimore, Maryland, Atlantic City, and Delaware. So you take that platform, and by the way, you know you can't have hot showers without electricity.
There you
So
go.
just
There you go. No, that's why I brought it up. But just to drill down a little bit on that number, just to clarify for our audience, you don't own power plants, right? You're a distribution utility, you're connected to the end user, you're very sensitive to their needs, to pricing. And so when you talk about $38 billion in CapEx, that's an awful lot of money.
It is.
A significant share of the total U.S. investment base. And it must be noted, we are at a very interesting up part of the cycle. Last year, it was observed that utility CapEx surpassed oil and gas CapEx for the first time in a very, very long time. And the trend line is upward because of the demand of the grid, because not only AI, but this broader trend. How are you going to pay for this?
Well,
shareholders, ratepayers, there's only two pockets.
Well, you know, we're regulated. We're a 100% regulated company. So there's a mechanism that the regulation says that you invest X, you get X plus Y in return. And the more efficiently you do it, the better your returns are. So it is. Our dollars are your dollars, our customer dollars. And how efficiently we do that, which brings the number one issue to us, is always centered around affordability. can you do it in an affordable manner? Because people don't care if it's clean. People don't care if they can't keep their lights on and their gas flowing. So that is our number one issue. And how do we embed technology across that platform to even do it more efficiently?
Let's spend a moment on that. We talked about AI in the context of requiring power. There's some hyperbole around how much energy will be required for AI, but it's clearly we've entered a period in which electricity demand is growing. We've already seen the numbers, in part because of AI data centers as well as other reasons. But what about the application of AI as a tool for grid-enhancing technologies, for drones, line vision? There's a lot of exciting technologies that are coming along the pike. How much of this is pie in the sky versus you're trying them out already?
It's real. I was teasing VJ. He's a mechanical engineer by training, and I can tell it comes out every once in a while. I would tell you that the tech companies are making the utilities better because they're pushing us to implement technology in our systems to get more out of what we have already without building a new power line, a new transmission line, or a new substation.
That may sound too good to be true to some people, so give us an example.
I'll give you an example. So for example, we utilize, I'm trying to make it real for you, so a substation for us, as the peak demand goes higher, it requires us to build a new substation, so a new substation may cost us about $50 million. But utilizing technology, we can use battery storage at that substation to meet the peak demand of a summer day and go without building a new substation, and it will take us for another 5 years. That's technology at play.
So predictive analytics?
Predictive analytics.
Maintenance.
So let me give you an example. Today, blue sky day is what our definition of it. Beautiful day. You go home today and you're without power. You're frustrated. My view is that there should never be a blue sky day that anyone loses power without us telling you that, hey, we have a planned outage. And you use predictive analytics, AI technology, to anticipate when a line can go out, and now you better serve. So we are pushing as a team to provide 24/7 blue sky day reliability. After a storm, everyone should be up within 12 hours. And after a major event, everyone should be up within 48 hours. You do not get there without technology and saving on capital investment.
Great. So you're investing to cope with the increasing demands that are coming on the system. We talked about that. We do have a big elephant in the room, though, and that is policy.
Yes.
You're about to take on the leadership of the Edison Electric Institute, which is the leading trade group representing investor-owned utilities,
yes.
And an important voice here in D.C. We're meeting in Washington, and pretty soon Congress is going to take up a budget reconciliation bill that it is thought may well throw parts of the Inflation Reduction Act under the bus. For good or ill, that's a longer conversation than the time we have now. But from the point of view of your individual utility, but also the ones you're going to represent soon, previously the position has been that you defend the IRA and the related laws and the subsidies and other support they provide for wind, for solar, for the other technologies. Yeah. Is that still going to be your position when you take over the leadership? And what does that mean?
It is. We believe in the IRA.
You're going to go to bat for the IRA?
We are.
Those are fighting words in this town right now.
No, we do it today. We're doing it today. We are meeting with Congress on the benefits, explaining the benefits of the IRA and the IIJA. Why? Because it benefits our customers. Understanding how a regulated utility works, every dollar that we save or we receive from a grant or something, a loan from the federal government, we pass right along to our customers and keeps their bills lower. And that is how we communicate with members of Congress. And we create real jobs. So for thinking in terms of, for every dollar of capital I get to invest, I get to hire 5 to 6 people and putting those dollars to work. So not only am I an economic driver in your jurisdiction or your community, I'm saving money. And that's real for us. Now let me take you to Exelon. Exelon, by us not having generating plants, I didn't benefit directly from the IIJA, but my communities that I served did. So they have gotten over $300 million in grants and loans to electrify and do things quicker than they otherwise would have. I combine that with my capital, that dollar goes much further. And it's a perfect example of 1 + 1 = 3. And I know there's certain parts of that that we may lose, but it's important to articulate the value.
And what kind of reception do you get when you make this argument behind closed doors? Are you
depends on where
showing the door, or
it depends on where you sit.
Yeah.
It really does. And I think members are saying, okay, these are real jobs in my communities, and I see the benefit. And that's how all politics is local. So connected back home to share the value and understand what we're doing. Because you cannot get to that energy security or energy dominance without building something. And how do you do it in an affordable manner is how we're approaching it.
I'm glad you talked about building, because I've long held that our country has gone bananas. Build absolutely nothing anywhere near anybody. And so the prospects of some kind of permitting reform, some kind of bipartisan push to allow the building of stuff again. Yes. We see President Trump has talked about this, and Secretary Wright. We see thinkers from the left like Ezra Klein, who's co-authored a recent book about building in abundance. Could there be a moment where we're going to start building again? What's your prognosis?
Well, and in terms of $38 billion across the X-line utilities, we're building now. It's not a matter of we can build, it's a matter of how quickly we can build. And permitting reform is required to build quickly, because it is no reason why to build a new transmission line to transfer power across states, it should take me 2 years just to get it sited. By the time I get it sited and permitted, the opportunity has passed. And we're not even talking about generation. We're talking about power lines that are running along an easement. That's the challenge.
Do you think that there's the political mood now to act on this?
I do. There's very few things that there's consensus on. Regulatory reform, there has a lot of momentum and consensus around, because everyone sees the need. And again, going back to how you started this conversation around energy security, that's why it's important.
Now, you talked about how quick one can build. One of the values that the big tech companies tell me that's important to them, it's not just how much power, but speed to power. If you're paid for most of the value in these data centers, hyperscale data centers, is in the chips. And these NVIDIA chips, in 2 years, there's a new generation of chips, right? You've lost most of the value if you haven't got power to run them. And so speed to power is as important as quantum or price of power. Yes. What are the fastest ways that in your district, and again, Chicago is booming with AI centers, others that you serve, is it the golden age of gas, as some people suggest, or is it really solar plus batteries, which some people argue are quicker to get set up?
For our audience, let me put it in perspective for you. You mentioned Chicago, Illinois. Is that we have 14 gigawatts of new data center load that has come on in the last couple of years, and a whole nother set of gigawatts that is being considered. The reason that they're going to Northern Illinois is a couple of things: abundance of land, reliable energy, and cheap price, and abundance of nuclear power in that state as well. How can we do it faster? Because it is necessary. The opportunity means involving the utilities sooner in terms of locating where you want to build and looking at the infrastructure that's involved and how can I connect you sooner. But you can't want to build and then say, hey, can I do it? Because then that's a backwards process. Engaging the utility early in the process so we can help you locate and tell you what you need. Because whether you're a 1 gigawatt data center, that doesn't mean you need 1 gigawatt overnight. You're building up to that, ramping up. I can help you meet that. And it's very true. Price is important, but more importantly, speed is the driver.
We're very close to Virginia, data center capital of the world, but also there has been pushback from local people. There's been pushback as well with an AWS project where there is a sense that the community was being asked to pay for transmission or upgrades that benefited the project rather than the community per se. What's your position on these sorts of challenges where there's a challenge on who pays for those upgrades?
Exelon has been very clear that we are all for economic development and data center growth if you're doing it the right way. And the right way does not shift costs from the large users to the residential or small businesses. Everyone shares in the benefits of the grid, so that everyone should pay for the benefits of the grid. You cannot have a reliable and resilient grid that the smallest users pay for. You started off with our size and scale. I have 10.7 million customers I have to serve. If you're co-locating yourself on a nuclear plant or site, they only have one customer to think about. That's not my job.
Power to the people. You heard it here first. Calvin Butler, everyone. Thank you very much, Calvin.
Please welcome Mirabella Brocate-Elbez, Global Head of Brand and Marketing at Semaphore.
Just a quick thank you to all of you for joining us today, to our amazing speakers, to all of you in the audience. That is a wrap for day one of the Semaphore 2025 World Economy Summit. We are back tomorrow with sessions around global innovation, global growth, and many others. So hope to see you back here, and have a good evening.